Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Nightmare Narratives. I can picture some of you already in bed, maybe some of you just getting home from work. Wherever you are, whatever time it is, I'm glad you're here. If this helps you relax or sleep, please like and subscribe. It means a lot. Now let's get you comfortable, and I'll tell you tonight's story. My name is Nathaniel Darkhorse, but everyone calls me Nate. I've been a park ranger for 7 years now, and at 29 they tell me I'm the youngest senior ranger in the history of Daniel Boone National Forest. That might sound impressive, but what it really means is I spend my days making sure kids don't fall off cliffs and adults don't feed the bears. I love my job, though, especially the summer camps. There's something magical about watching a city kid see their first real waterfall or catch their first fish. Before I became a ranger, I taught 3rd grade for 2 years. Kids have always made sense to me in a way adults sometimes don't. They ask the right questions. They notice things grown-ups miss. The Red River Gorge is my territory. It's a beautiful piece of Kentucky wilderness, full of sandstone cliffs and natural bridges that look like something from a fairy tale. The Cherokee used to consider this area sacred, and I can see why. When the morning mist rolls through those rock formations, it feels like you're standing in another world. This particular summer started like any other. 40 kids, ages 8 to 12, signed up for our 2-week wilderness camp. They came from Louisville and Lexington mostly, suburban kids whose biggest adventure before this was probably a trip to the mall. My job was to change that. "Welcome to Camp Wildwood," I called out as the buses pulled up on that first Monday in June. The weather was perfect, sunny and warm with just enough breeze to keep the bugs away. The kids poured out, chattering and laughing, their parents taking last-minute photos and giving final hugs. I had 4 assistant counselors helping me. Sarah, a college student studying environmental science. Mike, a local guy who knew every hiking trail in the gorge. Jenny, an art teacher who ran our nature crafts. And Tom, who handled our fishing and water activity. Good people, all of them. The kind you'd trust with your own kids. The first few days went exactly as planned. We hiked the easier trails, learned about local plants and animals, made friendship bracelets from vine fibers, and roasted marshmallows around the campfire. The kids were having a blast, and so were we. But on Wednesday night, something felt different. I was doing my final rounds, checking that all the kids were settled in their cabins, when I heard singing. It was coming from the direction of the old Cherokee ceremonial site, about a quarter mile from our camp. The melody was beautiful but strange, not like any song I knew. It sounded old, really old. I followed the sound, my flashlight beam dancing across the forest floor. But as I got closer to the site, the singing stopped. I searched around for 10 minutes, calling out, thinking maybe some of the kids had snuck out for an adventure. Nothing, just the normal sounds of night in the woods. When I got back to camp, I did a quick head count. All 40 kids were in their beds, fast asleep. The next morning, little Emma Rodriguez came up to me at breakfast. She was 8 years old, with pigtails and a gap-toothed smile that could light up a room. "Ranger Nate," she said, tugging on my sleeve. "I had the most wonderful dream last night." "Oh yeah? What about?" "There were children singing in the woods. They knew all the old songs, the ones from before people built cities. They wanted to teach them to me." I felt a chill run down my spine. "That's nice, Emma. But remember, we don't wander off at night, okay? The woods can be dangerous in the dark." She nodded seriously. "I know. But they weren't dangerous children. They were just lonely." I laughed it off, but her words stuck with me. That afternoon during nature study, I taught the kids about local folklore. I told them about the Cherokee stories about Hoy. For this land was considered sacred, about the importance of respecting the forest and its history. "Were there ever any scary stories?" asked Marcus, a 10-year-old from Louisville who wore thick glasses and loved monster movies. "Well," I said, settling cross-legged on the ground with the kids gathered around me, "there are some old European stories about creatures called changelings. They were supposed to replace children with copies that looked exactly the same but weren't quite right inside." "That's silly," said Emma. "Why would anyone want to replace children?" "It's just an old story," I assured them. Changeling tales were medieval superstition. People back then didn't understand things like autism or developmental delays, so they made up stories to explain why some children seemed different. But even as I said it, I felt uneasy. There was something about this place, especially at night, that made even silly stories feel possible. That evening, 3 more kids mentioned dreams about children singing in the woods. By Friday, half the camp was talking about the singing dreams. They all described the same thing: children's voices in the forest, singing songs that felt familiar but weren't quite recognizable. The dreams were so vivid that several kids asked if we could have a special nighttime hike to find the singers. Absolutely not, I told them firmly. Rule number 1 of camping is we stay together after dark, no exceptions. But I was curious. That night I asked Mike to help me do an extended patrol around the campsite. We armed ourselves with heavy-duty flashlights and radios and set out to investigate. The woods felt different after dark, more alive somehow. The usual cricket symphony seemed muted, and I kept thinking I heard whispers just beyond the reach of our light beams. We made it about halfway to the ceremonial site when Mike grabbed my arm. "Do you hear that?" he whispered. I stopped and listened. There it was, children singing, but not just 1 or 2 voices. It sounded like dozens of them, their voices weaving together in harmony. That was both beautiful and deeply unsettling. We crept closer, staying low and trying to make as little noise as possible. The singing grew clearer as we approached, and I started to make out words. But they weren't in English. They weren't in Cherokee either, as far as I could tell. The language sounded older than that, like something from the deepest roots of human speech. Through the trees, we could see a clearing where pale figures moved in a circle. Children, definitely children, but something was wrong with the way they moved. Too smooth, too coordinated, like they were all connected somehow. Mike raised his flashlight, about to flip it on, but I stopped him. Some instinct told me that would be a very bad idea. We watched for what felt like hours, but was probably only 10 minutes. The children, there had to be at least 30 of them, danced and sang under the moonlight. They were all roughly the same age as our campers, dressed in clothes that looked normal from a distance. But their faces, even in the dim light, I could tell something was off about their faces. The singing stopped all at once. Every head turned toward our hiding spot. "Run," I whispered to Mike. We crashed through the underbrush, not caring about the noise, just focused on getting back to camp. Behind us, I could hear laughter. High, sweet children's laughter that followed us all the way back to the safety of our cabins. When we reached camp, breathing hard and probably looking like we'd seen a ghost, Sarah met us at the edge of the clearing. "Thank God you're back," she said. "We've got a problem." She led us to the dining hall where Tom was sitting with a little boy I'd never seen before. He looked about 9 years old, with sandy hair and clothes that seemed familiar but not quite right. "This is Billy," Sarah said. "He says he's been part of our camp all along, but I've none ever seen him before in my life," Tom finished. "None of us have. But all the kids insist he's been here since Monday. They've got stories about playing with him, sharing meals with him. It's like he's always been here, but he wasn't," I said, studying the boy's face. He looked perfectly normal, perfectly innocent. But his eyes bothered me. They were too still, like a painting's eyes that seemed to follow you around a room. "Hi, Ranger Nate," Billy said with a bright smile. "Did you have a good night hike? The other children said you went looking for the singers." "What other children?" I asked carefully. "The ones in the forest, of course. They've been waiting to meet everyone. They're very excited about making new friends." Mike and I exchanged looks. Sarah and Tom clearly thought we were losing our minds, but they hadn't seen what we'd seen. "Billy," I said, kneeling down to his level, "where did you come from? What's your last name? Where do your parents live?" He tilted his head, still smiling. "I've always been here, Ranger Nate, just like the others. We belong to these woods now." A cold dread settled in my stomach. I stood up and pulled my staff aside. "We need to do a complete head count," I said quietly. "Right now. Wake up every kid and get them in the dining hall." It took 20 minutes to roust all the campers and get them assembled. As they filed in, sleepy and confused, I counted carefully. Sarah, Mike, Tom, and Jenny all counted too. 41 children. We had started with 40. Now we had 41, and nobody could explain where Billy had come from. But what was worse, what made my blood run cold, was that I couldn't remember which child was missing to make room for him. Looking at the group, they all seemed familiar. They all seemed like they belonged. But one of them had to be wrong, and I couldn't tell which one. "All right, everyone back to bed," I announced, trying to keep my voice steady. "Sorry for the disruption, just a head count mix-up." As the kids filed out, chattering about the late-night assembly, Emma Rodriguez stopped by my chair. "Ranger Nate," she whispered. "Billy isn't like the others." "What do you mean, sweetheart?" She looked around to make sure no one was listening. "He doesn't have any shadow stories." "Shadow stories?" "You know the stories your shadow tells when the light hits it just right. Everyone has them, but Billy's shadow is quiet. It's empty." She skipped away before I could ask what she meant, leaving me with more questions than answers, and a growing certainty that our perfect summer camp was about to become something much darker. The next morning brought parents for Family Day, our mid-camp celebration where moms and dads could visit and see what their kids had been learning. I'd been looking forward to it all week, but now I dreaded it. How do you explain to a parent that their child might not actually be their child? The Hendersons arrived first, looking for their daughter Katie. She ran up to them with a huge smile, threw her arms around her mother, and chattered excitedly about all her adventures. They hugged her back, laughing at her stories, completely normal and happy. But I watched Mrs. Henderson's face carefully. There was something there, just for a second, a flicker of confusion, like she was looking at a photograph that was almost but not quite right. "Katie seems different somehow," she said to me quietly, while her daughter was showing her father a bird's nest they'd found. "More confident, I guess. She's usually so shy with new people." "Summer camp can really bring kids out of their shells," I replied. But my heart was racing. The Martinezes came next, then the Johnsons, then the Patels. Same thing every time. Loving reunions, happy conversations. But parents looking just a little uncertain, like they were trying to remember something important they'd forgotten. When the Rodriguezes arrived to see Emma, she didn't run to them. She walked slowly, looking back at me with worry in her eyes. "Mama? Papa?" she said carefully, hugging them. But I noticed she kept watching my face while she spoke to them, like she was afraid of saying the wrong thing. During the family picnic, I overheard conversations that made my skin crawl. "Tommy, when did you learn to swim so well? You were afraid of the water last month." Sarah's vocabulary has really expanded. She's using words I've never heard her say before. "Mike, your appetite has certainly grown. You've always been such a picky eater." By evening, when the families were saying their goodbyes, I was certain. These weren't the same children who had arrived on Monday. They were close, frighteningly close, but they weren't the same. The real proof came that night. Jenny was doing a late check on the girls' cabins when she found one of them empty. All 8 beds were made, but the girls were gone. She radioed me immediately, and we quickly discovered that 2 boys' cabins were empty as well. 24 children missing. We found them at the ceremonial site, standing in a perfect circle with their backs to us. They weren't moving, weren't making any sound, just standing there in the moonlight like statues. "Kids," I called out, "what are you doing? You know you're not supposed to leave camp after dark." They turned around all at once, moving like they were connected by invisible strings. In the flashlight beams, their faces looked exactly like the children I'd been caring for all week, but their eyes reflected the light like an animal's. "We're learning the old songs, Ranger Nate," said a voice that might have been Katie Henderson. "The forest children are teaching us." "What forest children? There's no one else out here." They all smiled at the same time, the exact same smile. "Yes, there is. Look." I looked around the clearing and felt my knees go weak. There were more children now, lots more. They stood between the trees, barely visible in the darkness, but I could see their pale faces watching us. Dozens of them, maybe hundreds. "These woods have been collecting children for a very long time," said Billy, stepping forward from the circle. "Lost ones, forgotten ones, replaced ones. They're all here now, and they want to play." "You need to come back to camp," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. Right now. All of you." "Why?" asked Emma's voice, though the child speaking looked like Emma but felt wrong somehow. "We like it better here. We remember things here. Old things. Important things." The forest children began to sing, that same haunting melody I'd heard before. One by one, our campers joined in, their voices blending with the supernatural chorus. Jenny grabbed my arm. "Nate, we need to get out of here. Now!" She was right, but I couldn't leave the kids. "Everyone back to camp," I shouted over the singing. "That's an order." The singing stopped. The forest children faded back into the shadows. Our campers looked at us with expressions of innocent confusion. "Sorry, Ranger Nate," said Tommy Martinez. "We couldn't sleep and heard music. We just wanted to see what it was." They followed us back to camp without further protest, chattering normally about the strange dream they'd all shared. But I noticed things that chilled me to the bone. They walked in perfect formation without discussing it. They all stepped over obstacles at exactly the same time, and when we passed under a streetlight near the dining hall, half of them cast no shadows at all. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat up in my cabin, writing everything down, trying to make sense of what was happening. Around 3 a.m, I heard a soft knock on my door. Emma Rodriguez stood on my porch in her pajamas, tears streaming down her face. "Ranger Nate," she whispered. "I'm still me, but I'm the only one left." Before I could respond, she pressed something into my hand. A small wooden whistle carved with symbols I didn't recognize. "T, he Cherokee lady at the gift shop gave this to me on Monday. She said it would help me remember who I am. But the others, they're forgetting. The forest children are taking their memories and leaving empty copies." "Emma, what are you talking about?" "They replace you slowly, from the inside out. First your dreams, then your memories, then your feelings. Pretty soon, you look the same and sound the same, but you're not you anymore. You're one of them." She looked back toward the cabins where the other children slept. "I think they're going to try to replace me tonight. The whistle helps, but I'm getting tired. It's hard to remember why I should fight them." I knelt down and took her hands. They were ice cold. "Emma, I need you to stay strong, okay? Can you do that for me?" She nodded, but I could see the exhaustion in her eyes. "I'll try, Ranger Nate, but you need to get us out of here, all of us, before there's nothing left to save." As she walked back to her cabin, I noticed something that made my heart stop. In the porch light, Emma's shadow was flickering, like a candle flame in the wind. Whatever was happening to the other children was starting to happen to her too. I had maybe one day left to figure out how to save them. One day before I lost the last real child in my care to whatever ancient hunger lived in these woods. The next morning, Emma was gone. Her bunk was empty, sheets neatly folded, as if she'd never been there at all. When I asked the other children about her, they looked at me with polite confusion. "Emma who?" asked the girl I'd thought was Katie Henderson. "We don't have an Emma at camp, Ranger Nate." But I still had the whistle. The wooden whistle carved with Cherokee symbols that Emma had pressed into my hand the night before. It was the only proof I had that she'd ever existed. I found Jenny cleaning up after breakfast, humming under her breath. "Jenny," I said, "do you remember Emma Rodriguez? 8 years old, pigtails, gap-toothed smile?" She paused in her sweeping and gave me a concerned look. "Nate, are you feeling all right? We don't have any Rodriguez family on our roster." My hands started shaking. "Check the sign-in sheets from Monday. Check the medical forms." She pulled out her clipboard and flipped through the pages. "Here's everyone, Nate. 40 children, just like always. No Emma Rodriguez." The papers were right. According to every official record, Emma had never existed. But I remembered her clearly. Her laugh, her questions about the forest, her warning about shadow stories. That's when I understood. They weren't just replacing the children. They were erasing them completely, rewriting reality so that the stolen children had never existed at all. I spent the day watching the remaining campers, looking for any sign that they were still themselves. But they all acted perfectly normal, perfectly happy. They played games, sang songs, and followed instructions without complaint. They were model children in every way, except for the eyes. Their eyes were all wrong, too calm, too knowing, like they were looking at the world from a great distance. As evening approached, I made a decision. I gathered all the children in the dining hall and locked the doors. "We're going to play a special game," I announced. "It's called Memory Circle. Everyone sit down and we'll take turns sharing our favorite memory from before camp started." They arranged themselves in a perfect circle without any discussion, which should have been impossible with 40 kids. But they did it smoothly, quietly, like they were following invisible choreography. "I'll go first," I said, sitting down with them. My favorite memory from before camp was teaching 3rd grade. I had a student named Maria who was afraid of reading out loud. But by the end of the year, she was reading her own stories to the whole class. I looked around the circle. "Who wants to go next?" The boy who looked like Tommy Martinez raised his hat and says, "My favorite memory is... He paused, his face scrunching up with concentration. "I remember playing in my backyard." It came out like a question, like he wasn't sure if it was true. "Tell us about your backyard, Tommy," I said gently. "What did it look like?" "It was green, with grass, and there was a thing for climbing." "A tree?" "Yes, a tree." He smiled with relief. I liked climbing the tree. One by one, I went around the circle. Every child struggled to remember basic details about their life before camp. They knew they were supposed to have memories, but the specific details were fuzzy, generic, like they were making them up on the spot. "Where do you live, Katie?" I asked the Henderson girl. "In a house," she replied confidently. "What color is your house?" House color? Do you have any pets?" "I think so. Maybe a dog?" My heart was breaking. These weren't evil creatures pretending to be children. They were empty shells trying desperately to be human, filled with stolen fragments of memory that didn't quite fit together. "Ranger Nate," said the boy who'd called himself Billy, "why are you asking us these questions? We're having fun at camp. Isn't that enough?" "Because I want to help you remember who you really are," I said. "But we are who we are," he replied, and for the first time there was something sharp in his voice. "We've always been who we are." The other children nodded in agreement, their movements synchronized like a flock of birds turning. "No," I said, standing up. "You're not. You're copies, echoes. The real children are somewhere else, and I'm going to find them." The temperature in the room dropped 20 degrees. The children all turned to look at me with identical expressions of disappointment. "That's not very nice, Ranger Nate," they said in unison. "We thought you cared about us." "I do care about you. I care about the real you, the children you used to be before something stole your memories and replaced them with shadows." The windows began to rattle. Outside I could hear singing, the say, me haunting melody from the ceremonial site, but closer now, much closer. "The forest children want to meet you," Billy said, his voice layered with harmonies that definitely weren't coming from a 9-year-old boy's throat. "They've been very patient, but patience has its limits." The locked doors swung open on their own. Through the doorway, I could see pale figures gathering in the darkness outside. Dozens of them, maybe hundreds, all children who looked almost, but not quite human. "Come outside, Ranger Nate," the campers said together. "Join the celebration. Be part of the family." "Where are the real children?" I demanded. "What did you do with them?" "We are the real children," they replied. "We just remember more now. We remember the old songs, the old games, the old hungers. We remember what it was like before grown-ups taught us to be small." I pulled Emma's whistle from my pocket. The wooden surface was warm to the touch, and the carved symbols seemed to glow faintly in the dim light. "Emma Rodriguez gave me this," I said. "She was the last real child here, and she fought you off longer than the others. That means there's still hope." I put the whistle to my lips and blew as hard as I could. The sound that came out was unlike anything I'd ever heard. Not quite music, not quite speech, but something older than both. It cut through the supernatural singing like a knife, and the forest children outside shrieked in pain and fury. The campers in the dining hall flickered like bad TV reception. For just a moment I could see through their disguises to what lay underneath. Hollow spaces in the shape of children maintained by stolen memories and desperate longing. "You don't understand," Billy said, his perfect child face cracking like old paint. "We're not the monsters in this story. We're the victims. Forgotten children, lost children, children who fell through as the cracks of the world. All we want is to belong somewhere, to be remembered, to matter." "Then find another way," I said, blowing the whistle again. "Don't steal what isn't yours." A tongue. Sound sent another wave of pain through the gathering supernatural host. Some of the forest children began to fade, their forms becoming translucent. "We tried other ways," the campers said, their voices now openly harmonizing in inhuman chords. "For centuries we tried, but the world forgot us anyway. At least this way, we get to exist." "Existing by stealing someone else's life isn't existing at all," I replied. "It's just another kind of forgetting." I blew the whistle a third time, and this time something different happened. Instead of causing pain, the sound seemed to unlock something. The air shimmered, and I could see past the surface of reality to what lay beneath. There, trapped in a space between worlds, were the real children. All 40 of them, including Emma, suspended in a dreamless sleep while their memories and identities were slowly drained away to feed the hungry ghosts that had replaced them. "I can see them," I whispered. "I can see where you've hidden them." "You can't save them," Billy said, but his voice was less confident now. "They're too far gone. In another day, there won't be anything left to save." "Maybe," I said, tucking the whistle back into my pocket. "But I have to try." What happened next is hard to explain in a way that makes sense. The whistle didn't just make sound, it made memory. When I blew it that final time, focusing all my will on the image of the trapped children, it created a bridge between their prison and our world. One by one, the real campers began to flicker back into existence, overlapping with their hollow replacements. For a terrifying moment, there were 2 of each child. The real one confused and frightened, the false one growing dimmer and more desperate. "Please," the hollow children begged as they started to fade. "Please don't make us disappear again. We just wanted to belong." "I'm sorry," I said, and I me, "and it. But this isn't the way." The forest children outside wailed as their stolen sustenance was torn away from them. Some of them collapsed into shadows and scattered on the wind. Others retreated deeper into the woods, their hungry eyes promising that this wasn't over. As the real children solidified back into the world, the dining hall filled with confused voices. "Ranger Nate, what happened? Why does everything feel fuzzy?" "I had the weirdest dreams." "Where are we? Weren't we just outside?" Emma Rodriguez stumbled toward me, still clutching her teddy bear. "Ranger Nate, you did it! You saved us!" I scooped her up in a hug, feeling the solid reality of her small body, the warmth of her breathing, the slightly sticky texture of her hair from too much camp food and not enough baths. She was real. They were all real. "How do you feel?" I asked her quietly. "Tired," she said. "Like I've been sleeping for a really long time and dreaming someone else's dreams." The next few hours were controlled chaos. Kids were confused and scared, having fragments of memories that didn't belong to them mixed up with their own experiences. Several were crying, not sure why they felt afraid. My assistant counselors were completely bewildered, having no memory of the past few days' strangeness. I called for immediate evacuation. Parents were contacted, buses were arranged, and by dawn, all 40 children were on their way home with instructions for their families to watch for signs of trauma and confusion. The official report I filed blamed the incident on a gas leak from an old mining operation that had caused mass hallucinations. The state bought it, probably because the alternative was too strange to believe. Camp Wildwood was shut down indefinitely, and I was transferred to a desk job pending psychological evaluation. But Emma Rodriguez kept in touch. Her parents sent me letters throughout the rest of the summer, updating me on her recovery. She was doing well, they said, though she sometimes woke up from nightmares about children singing in the woods. She'd started checking her shadow obsessively, making sure it was still there and still moving the right way. In September, I got a package from Emma with no return address. Inside was a drawing she'd made, dozens of pale children standing around a campfire in a dark forest. At the bottom, in her careful 8-year-old handwriting, she'd written, "They're still waiting." I never went back to Red River Gorge. These days I work at a state office in Frankfurt, processing permits and filing reports. It's boring work, but it's safe. No children to protect, no ancient hungers to face, no impossible choices to make. But sometimes, when I'm walking through the city and I see groups of children playing in parks or walking home from school, I find myself studying their faces, looking for that telltale stillness in their eyes, that too perfect coordination in their movements. Because Emma was right. They're still out there, still waiting. The hollow children, the forgotten ones, the hungry ghosts that want nothing more than to be remembered and loved. They're in every forest where children have ever gone missing, every old place where the world has grown thin between what is and what was. And sometimes, late at night when I can't sleep, I think I can still hear them singing. Not the harsh, desperate song of the forest children, but something sadder and softer, the lullaby of all the lost children in the world, calling for someone to come and take them home. I keep Emma's whistle in my desk drawer at work, just in case. Because I learned something important during those terrible days at Camp Wildwood. The difference between caring for children and truly seeing them, between protecting their bodies and protecting their souls. Real children cast real shadows. Real children have messy memories and contradictory feelings and imperfect dreams. Real children are loud and difficult and gloriously, chaotically human. And as long as I remember that, as long as any of us remember that, then maybe the hollow children will have to keep waiting a little longer before they find their next opportunity to steal what was never meant to be theirs. The real tragedy isn't that monsters exist. It's that sometimes monsters start out as victims too. The hollow children were once real children who'd been forgotten, abandoned, lost between the cracks of a world that didn't care enough to remember their names. I still can't decide if what I did was heroic or cruel. I saved 40 real children, but I condemned hundreds of hollow ones to remain forever hungry, forever empty, forever forgotten. All I know for certain is this. When you're responsible for children, any children, real or otherwise, you have to choose who deserves to exist, and that choice will haunt you for the rest of your life, no matter what you decide. My name is Solomon Grimm, but everyone calls me Saul. I've been a ranger in the Monongahela National Forest for 11 years now, and I thought I'd seen everything these mountains could throw at me. Winter rescues, lost hikers, bear attacks, you name it. I've handled it. But nothing, and I mean nothing, prepared me for what happened in February of 1983. I was 37 then, old enough to know better, but young enough to think I was tough. The Army taught me to be a medic before I came to these woods, so I knew how to keep people alive when everything went wrong. That's what I was good at, pulling folks back from the edge when the mountains tried to claim them. The Dolly Sod's wilderness is different from the rest of the forest. It sits up high like a piece of Canada dropped into West Virginia. The wind never stops blowing up there, and in winter it feels like the North Pole. The old-timers always said strange things happened in those high places, but I figured they were just trying to scare the tourists. I should have listened to them. The call came in on a Tuesday morning. 3 college kids from Pittsburgh had gone camping in Dolly Sods over the weekend. When they didn't come home Monday night, their parents called us. The weather report showed a big storm coming, so we had to move fast. My partner that week was Jake Morrison, a good kid about 10 years younger than me. He'd been with the service for 3 years and was eager to prove himself. Jake was the kind of guy who always had a smile and a joke, even when things got bad. He reminded me of my younger brother, which is probably why I liked him so much. We loaded up the truck with winter gear, sleeping bags rated for 30 below, enough food for a week, emergency flares, and the radio equipment. The forecast called for heavy snow, but nothing we couldn't handle. We'd done dozens of winter rescues. Think titiators. They're still alive up there? Jake asked as we drove up the mountain road. College kids are tougher than they look, I said. Besides, they had good gear. Saw their packs when they checked in at the ranger station. The temperature was already dropping when we reached the trailhead. The wind cut through our heavy coats like they were made of paper. Snow was starting to fall. Not the pretty, gentle kind you see in movies, but hard, stinging flakes that felt like needles on your face. We hiked for 2 hours before we found their camp. The tent was still standing, which was a good sign. But when we looked inside, all their gear was there and the sleeping bags looked like they'd been slept in, but the kids were gone. Maybe they went for a hike, Jake said, but he didn't sound convinced. I found their trail heading north toward the high country. The tracks were already filling with snow, but I could still make them out. 3 sets of boots, walking together. Nothing looked wrong about it. No signs of struggle, no blood, no torn clothing. We follow the trail, I decided. They probably got lost when the weather turned. That's when the real snow started. In 20 minutes, we went from light flakes to a full blizzard. The wind picked up until it was howling like a living thing. I'd seen bad weather before, but this was different. It felt angry, like the storm had it in for us personally. We only made it another mile before I had to call it. The snow was coming down so hard we couldn't see 10 feet in any direction. The wind was gusting so strong it knocked Jake over twice. "We need shelter," I yelled over the storm. "There's an old ranger cabin about half a mile west." Finding that cabin in the whiteout was like looking for a needle in a haystack, but we got lucky. Jake spotted the roof through the snow, and we stumbled inside just as the full force of the storm hit. The cabin was basic. 1 room with a wood stove, some old bunks, and emergency supplies. It hadn't been used in years, but it was solid and dry. We got a fire going and settled in to wait. Out the worst of it. That's when I tried the radio. Static. Nothing but static on every channel. "Atmospheric interference," I told Jake. "The storm's messing with the signal." But I'd worked through plenty of storms before, and I'd never had the radio go completely dead. Something felt wrong about it, but I couldn't put my finger on what. We heated up some soup and tried to stay positive. The college kids were probably holed up somewhere just like we were, waiting for the storm to pass. We'd find them in the morning, and everyone would go home with a good story to tell. I should have known it wouldn't be that easy. The wind kept getting stronger. By evening, it sounded like a freight train circling the cabin. Snow was piling up against the windows so thick we couldn't see outside at all. The whole building shook with every gust. "Never seen a storm like this," Jake said, staring at the white-covered window. "Mountain weather," I replied. "It'll blow itself out by morning." But even as I said it, I didn't believe it. Something about this storm felt wrong. It was too sudden, too violent, too focused, like it was trying to trap us up here. Around midnight, we heard something over the wind, a sound that made us both freeze. It sounded like screaming. "Did you hear that?" Jake whispered. I held up my hand for quiet and listened. The wind was still roaring, but there it was again. A thin, high sound that cut through the storm like a knife. "Could be the college kids," I said, grabbing my coat. "Sol, you can't go out there. You'll be lost in 30 seconds. He was right. But that sound, it was human. Someone was in trouble. I opened the door just a crack. The wind tried to rip it out of my hands, and snow blasted into the cabin like a shotgun blast. I couldn't see anything except swirling white, but the screaming came again, closer this time. Then it stopped. We waited for 10 minutes, listening hard. But there was nothing except the storm. I closed the door and we went back to the fire. "Probably just the wind," I said. "It can sound like voices sometimes." Jake nodded, but I could see he wasn't convinced. Neither was I, if I'm being honest. We took turns keeping watch that night. Not because we expected trouble, but because that's what you do in a survival situation. You stay alert. When it was my turn to sleep, I kept dreaming about that screaming sound. In the dream, I could see who was making it, but every time I tried to look closer, they disappeared into the snow. Morning came gray and cold. The storm had finally stopped, but it had left behind 8 feet of fresh snow. Everything outside looked different, like we were on an alien planet made of white. "Radio still dead?" Jake asked. I tried all the channels again. Still nothing but static. "We need to find those kids," I said. "Storm's over. Time to get to work." We strapped on snowshoes and headed out. The snow was so deep it covered most of the trees. What used to be a forest now looked like a field of white lumps with a few tall pines sticking out. Finding the students' trail was impossible. The storm had erased everything. But I knew the general direction they'd been heading, toward a series of caves about 2 miles north. If they'd gotten caught in the storm, they might have taken shelter there. It took us 3 hours to cover 2 miles. The snow was loose and deep, and even with snowshoes, we sank in past our knees with every step. By the time we reached the cave area, we were both exhausted. That's when we found the first body. It was sticking up out of a snowdrift like a signpost. Just an arm at first, wearing a blue jacket. Jake saw it and went white as the snow around us. "Oh God, Saul. Oh God." We dug carefully, the way they taught us in rescue training, but there wasn't much point in being gentle. The kid had been dead for hours, maybe since the night before. The cold had frozen him solid. It was a boy, maybe 20 years old, brown hair, nice face. He was wearing good winter gear, the expensive kind that should have kept him warm, but his jacket was open, like he'd been trying to cool off. That didn't make sense. Nobody opens their coat in a blizzard. "Hypothermia can make you feel hot right before you die," I explained to Jake. "Makes people take their clothes off." But when we rolled him over, I saw something that made my blood turn to ice. There were bite marks on his neck. Deep ones, like something with very sharp teeth had torn into him. "Jesus Christ," Jake whispered. "What did that?" "Bear, maybe?" But even as I said it, I knew it was wrong. Bears were hibernating. Besides, the wounds were too clean, too precise. They looked almost human. We searched the area for the other 2 students, found them both within 50 yards, buried under snowdrifts. The girl was missing entirely. All we found were pieces of her torn clothing and a lot of blood. The second boy was intact, but he'd been changed. His skin was white as the snow, and his lips were blue-black. That could have been the cold, but his eyes were wrong too. They were wide open and completely white, like cataracts, but he'd been a young man. And his mouth, God, his mouth was full of blood that wasn't his own. "We need to get out of here," Jake said. His voice was shaking. "Right now." I wanted to agree with him, but something caught my eye. Tracks in the snow, leading away from the bodies. Not human tracks, not animal tracks either. They were huge, maybe 18 inches long, with claw marks at the ends. Whatever made them was heavy enough to press deep into the snow even during the storm. The tracks led north, deeper into the wilderness. "Saul, are you listening to me? We need to leave." I looked at Jake. His face was pale and his hands were shaking. The kid was spooked and I couldn't blame him. "You're right," I said. "Let's head back to the bin and try to get the radio working." But as we turned to go, I heard something that made my skin crawl. It was singing, a low humming tune that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. The melody was simple, almost like a children's lullaby, but there was something wrong with it, something hungry. "You hear that?" I asked. "Hear what?" The singing stopped. We made it back to the cabin as fast as we could, but the whole way I felt like something was watching us. Every shadow between the trees looked like it might be hiding something. Every sound the wind made through the branches sounded like whispers. When we got inside, Jake went straight to the radio while I built up the fire. "Still nothing," he reported. "Not even static now. It's completely dead." That's when I noticed our food supply. We'd packed enough for a week. Canned goods, energy bars, dried fruit, coffee. Enough to keep 2 men fed while we searched. Half of it was gone. "Jake, did you eat something while I was outside this morning?" Just a energy bar. Why? I showed him the nearly empty supply pack. We're missing 3 days' worth of food. Jake stared at the pack like it might bite him. That's impossible. It was full yesterday. I checked everything twice. No doubt about it. Most of our food had disappeared overnight, but the packaging wasn't scattered around like an animal had gotten into it. The missing items were just gone. Maybe I miscounted when I packed, I said, but I knew that wasn't right. 11 years of doing this job teaches you to keep track of supplies. Sol, something's really wrong here. I was starting to agree with him. Dead college kids with bite marks, impossible tracks in the snow, food vanishing overnight, radios that wouldn't work. Add it all up and you got a situation that didn't make sense. But it was about to get a lot worse. That evening, while we were trying to make our remaining food last, we heard the singing again. This time it was right outside the cabin. The singing was soft at first, almost like a whisper, but it was definitely coming from just outside our door. I grabbed the shotgun from the emergency supplies and motioned for Jake to stay quiet. The melody was the same as before, simple and repetitive, like something a child might hum. But there was something about it that made my teeth ache. It sounded hungry, if that makes sense, like the song itself wanted to devour something. I crept to the window and tried to look out, but the snow was still piled too high. All I could see was white. The singing stopped. Then something scratched at the door. 3 long, slow scrapes, like fingernails on wood. Except these sounded more like claws. Jake grabbed my arm. "Don't open it," he whispered. I wasn't planning to. Whatever was out there, it had killed 3 college kids and stolen our food. I wasn't about to invite it in for dinner. We waited. After about 10 minutes, the scratching stopped and everything went quiet. Too quiet. Even the wind had died down. "Is it gone?" Jake asked. I didn't answer. Something told me it wasn't gone, just waiting. I was right. Around 3 in the morning, I woke up to Jake shaking me. "Sol, wake up. Something's in here." I sat up fast, reaching for the shotgun. The fire had burned down to coals, so the cabin was mostly dark. But I could see well enough to know we were alone. "There's nothing here, Jake." I heard it moving around, something big. I listened carefully. The cabin was silent except for the wind outside and the soft crackle of the dying fire. "You were dreaming." "No, I wasn't. Look at the food pack." I turned on my flashlight and checked our supplies. More food was missing. The last of our canned soup, half our energy bars, and all the coffee. "Jake, did you?" "No, I've been awake for 2 hours. I didn't eat anything." This was getting scary. Either Jake was lying, which didn't seem likely, or something was getting into our cabin and taking our food while we slept. But how? The door was locked. The windows were snowed over, and I would have heard anything big enough to move around in here. "Maybe there's a loose board somewhere," I said. "Something small could squeeze through." But as I said it, I was thinking about those tracks in the snow. Whatever made those prints wasn't small. We spent the next hour checking every inch of the cabin. The walls were solid, the roof was tight, and there was no way anything bigger than a mouse could get in. But our food kept disappearing. "Sol, I'm scared." I looked at Jake. He was 27 years old, trained in wilderness survival, and tough as nails. But he looked like a scared kid. "We'll be okay," I said. "Soon as this weather clears, we'll hike out and get help." But the weather wasn't clearing. If anything, it was getting worse. By morning it was snowing again, not as hard as the first storm, but steady. The temperature had dropped to at least 20 below, maybe colder, and we were running out of food fast. "We need to ration what's left," I told Jake. "Make it last until the weather breaks." But even as I said it, I was doing the math in my head. At the rate food was disappearing, we'd be completely out in 2 days. 3 at the most. That's when I started feeling it, a gnawing in my stomach that had nothing to do with being hungry. It felt like something was eating me from the inside out. I'd been hungry before, plenty of times, but this was different. This hurt. You feel that? Jake asked, holding his stomach. Feel what? Like I'm starving. But we just ate an hour ago. I had felt it too, but I didn't want to admit it. The hunger was getting stronger every hour, and no amount of food seemed to help. We were eating our remaining supplies twice as fast as we should have been, but it wasn't enough. By the third day, we were both obsessed with food. We talked about it constantly. What we'd eat when we got back to civilization, our favorite meals, restaurants we'd been to. It was all we could think about. That's when Jake said something that should have been a warning. You ever wonder what human meat tastes like? What? I mean, we're just animals, right? Like deer or pigs. Probably tastes similar. Jake, that's sick. I'm not saying I'd do it, just wondering. But the way he looked at me when he said it made my skin crawl. There was something in his eyes, a kind of hunger that had nothing to do with food. The fourth day was when we found the bones. We'd been searching for firewood when we came across them, scattered around a clearing about a quarter-mile from the cabin. Human bones, old and yellowed, arranged in a perfect circle. In the center was a skull that had been cracked open, and there were tool marks on the long bones, the kind you'd make if you were trying to get at the marrow. Jesus, Jake whispered. How long have these been here? I knelt down for a closer look. The bones were old, maybe 50 years or more. But they'd been arranged recently. There was no moss or leaves on them, and they were sitting on top of the snow. Logging camp, I said, remembering the old stories. There was a camp up here in the 30s, had a bad winter, got cut off by the snow. When the spring thaw came, they found the survivors had been... I didn't finish the sentence. I didn't have to. Cannibals? That's what the old-timers said, but I always figured it was just stories. Jake walked around the circle of bones, studying them. Maybe they weren't stories. That night, the scratching at the door came back. But this time, it wasn't just scratching. Something was trying to get in. The whole cabin shook as whatever was outside threw itself against the walls. It's testing the structure, I whispered to Jake, looking for weak spots. We huddled by the fire with the shotgun between us, waiting for the attack to stop. But it went on for hours. Sometimes the scratching came from the door, sometimes the windows, times the roof. Whatever was out there was big, strong, and patient. Around dawn, it stopped. When we looked outside, we found tracks all around the cabin. The same 18-inch prints we'd seen before, but now there were dozens of them. They circled the building over and over, like whatever made them had been pacing. It's hunting us, Jake said. I was starting to think he was right. That's when Jake tried to eat me. I was checking our last can of food, a small tin of peaches that would have to last us both through the day, when Jake came up behind me with a piece of firewood. I heard him at the last second and rolled away. The wood crashed into the wall where my head had been. Jake, what are you doing? His eyes were completely wrong. They were white and empty, just like the dead college boy we'd found. And his mouth, God, his mouth was full of saliva, and he was making this low, growling sound. So hungry, he mumbled. So hungry, Saul. Just a little bit. Just a taste. He came at me again with the firewood. I had to tackle him to get it away, and even then he kept trying to bite me. His teeth were sharp, sharper than they should have been. I managed to tie him up with some rope from our supplies, but the whole time he kept begging me to let him have just a little bite. Please, Saul, I'm starving. You don't understand how hungry I am. But I did understand. The hunger was eating at me too, getting stronger every hour. Looking at Jake tied up there, I started thinking about how thin he'd gotten, how there wasn't much meat on his bones, but maybe enough for a few meals if I was careful about it. That's when I realized what was happening to us. Whatever was outside wasn't just hunting us, it was changing us. I left Jake tied up and went outside with a shotgun. I had to know what we were dealing with. The tracks were everywhere now, not just around the cabin, but licours, eating off in all directions. I followed the freshest set, the ones that led back toward where we'd found the college kids. What I found there made me understand everything. The bodies were gone. All three of them had been dug up and taken. but in their place was something that made my blood freeze. More bones arranged in patterns, fresh bones with meat still clinging to them. And standing in the middle of it all was the thing that had been hunting us. It was 15 feet tall and thin as a rail. Its skin looked like ice, translucent and blue-white. I could see its ribs through its chest, and its arms were so long they nearly touched the ground. But the worst part was its face. It looked almost human, except for the mouth. The mouth was too wide, full of teeth like broken glass. When it saw me, it smiled. "Hello, Solomon," it said in a voice like winter wind. "I've been waiting for you." "What are you?" "I am hunger," it said. "I am the need that drives men to do terrible things. I am what your people call wendigo." The old Native American stories came flooding back, cannibalistic spirits that infected people during harsh winters, driving them to eat human flesh. I'd always thought they were just myths. The college kids fed me well, but I am still hungry. I am always hungry. "What do you want?" "I want you to choose," it said. "Your friend is already changing. Soon he will be like me, empty, desperate, eternally starving. You can join him, or you can feed him." I looked back toward the cabin. Jake was in there, tied up, probably still begging for just a taste of meat. Human meat. "There's a third option," I said, raising the shotgun. The wendigo laughed. "Fire cannot kill hunger, Solomon. Nothing can, but you can embrace it. Stop fighting what you are becoming." It was right about one thing. I was changing. The hunger was so strong now it felt like my stomach was eating itself. Every time I looked at my own hand, I wondered what it would taste like. "The loggers in the 30s, I said. "You did this to them too." "Oh yes, they lasted 2 months before they started eating each other." "But you are stronger than they were. You might last 3. And then? Then you become like me, forever hungry, forever hunting. It is not such a bad existence if you learn to enjoy the hunt." That's when I understood what I had to do. I turned and ran back to the cabin as fast as I could. The wendigo followed, but it wasn't in a hurry. It knew I couldn't escape. Where would I go? The snow was too deep, the cold too intense. Without shelter and supplies, I'd be dead in hours. But I wasn't planning to escape. Jake was still tied up when I got back, but now he was unconscious. His breathing was shallow and his skin had turned the same blue-white color as the wendigo. The change was almost complete. I gathered up everything flammable I could find. Wood, paper, gasoline from our emergency supplies, even our spare clothes. I piled it all in the center of the cabin. The wendigo appeared in the doorway just as I struck the match. "What are you doing?" "Something you probably don't expect," I said, and dropped the match. The cabin went up like a torch. The dry wood and gasoline created an inferno that filled the room in seconds. The heat was incredible, like standing inside an oven. The wendigo screamed and staggered backward. Its ice skin began to melt and steam rose from its body. "Fire cannot kill me," it howled. "Maybe not," I yelled back over the roar of flames, "but it can hurt you, and it can do something else." I ran to the window and smashed it out with the shotgun butt. Cold air rushed in, but it also let the superheated air from the fire rush out. The temperature difference created an updraft that pulled the flames higher and higher. Within minutes, the whole forest around the cabin was burning. The snow melted and turned to steam. The air itself seemed to be on fire. The wendigo was screaming now, a sound like breaking glass. Its body was dissolving in the heat, becoming vapor and shadow. "You cannot. But it was wrong. The fire was destroying it, or at least driving it away. As the flames spread, the creature became less solid, more like smoke. Finally, with one last shriek of rage, it vanished entirely. I grabbed Jake and dragged him outside. The heat from the burning forest had melted the snow for hundreds of yards in all directions. For the first time in days, I could see the sky clearly. That's when I heard the helicopter. The thermal updraft from the fire had created a column of warm air that rose thousands of feet into the atmosphere. The pilot saw it from miles away and came to investigate. He found us both, half conscious and badly frostbitten, sitting in the middle of what looked like a war zone. Jake recovered mostly. He spent 3 weeks in the hospital and doesn't remember much about what happened after we found the first body. The doctors said it was trauma-induced amnesia, and maybe they're right. But sometimes, late at night, he calls me and asks if I remember what human meat tastes like. I always hang up. The official report blamed everything on extreme weather and psychological breakdown. 3 college students died of exposure, and 2 forest rangers suffered severe hypothermia and temporary psychosis brought on by starvation and isolation. Nobody mentioned the wendigo, nobody mentioned the missing food or the impossible tracks or the fact that I burned down 3 square miles of national forest in the middle of winter. I lost 4 toes to frostbite and spent 2 months in physical therapy learning to walk properly again. But the physical damage wasn't the worst part. I can't eat meat anymore. Haven't been able to since that day. Every time I try, I taste something wrong. Something that reminds me of those 5 days in the cabin when I was so hungry, I considered eating my partner. The nightmares started about a month after I got out of the hospital. Always the same dream. I'm back in the cabin, Jake is tied up in the corner, and I am holding a knife. In the dream, I'm not trying to save him. I'm trying to decide which piece to cut off first. I retired from the Forest Service 6 months later, told them I was too old for winter rescues, but the truth was I couldn't go back up to those high places. Every time I tried, I'd hear singing in the wind. That was 40 years ago, and I still can't forget. But the worst part is what happened after. See, I read the papers now, more than I used to. And every winter, somewhere in the mountains, Colorado, Montana, Alaska, there are reports of missing campers, people who vanish in blizzards and turn up later with bite marks on their necks, or people who go missing and are never found at all. The wendigo didn't die in that fire. I heard it, maybe even banished it for a while, but I didn't kill it. Things like that don't die, they just move on looking for new hunting grounds, new victims to corrupt with unnatural hunger. Sometimes I think about going back up there, trying to finish what I started. But I'm 81 years old now, and I know I wouldn't last a day in those mountains. Besides, I'm not sure I could trust myself. The hunger never really went away. It's weaker now, manageable most of the time, but it's still there, especially in winter when the snow starts falling and the wind begins to howl. That's when I remember what it felt like to want something so bad you'd do anything to get it, to be so empty inside that you'd sacrifice everything, your humanity, your soul, your best friend, just to fill the void. The wendigo taught me something about human nature that I wish I'd never learned. We're all just one bad winter away from becoming monsters. All it takes is enough hunger, enough desperation, enough time alone with our worst impulses. The thing is still out there somewhere, still hunting, still singing its lullaby to lost travelers who don't know. Ow, they're walking into a trap. And sometimes, late at night when the wind is howling and the snow is falling hard, I find myself humming along. My name is Augustus Ironwood, but everyone calls me Gus. I've been a park ranger for 23 years now, longer than anyone else in this district. At 56, I'm probably too old to be hiking 15 miles into the wilderness alone, but some jobs just can't wait. The call came in on a Tuesday morning in October 1962. A college professor from the university had gone missing in the Cranberry Glades. Dr. Martin Henley, a plant scientist who'd been studying the rare flowers that grew in our ancient bogs. His car was found at the trailhead 3 days ago, but no sign of him after that. I knew those bogs better than anyone. Spent half my career mapping every stream and sinkhole in that wet, wild place. The Cranberry Glades sit up at 3,400 feet, where the air gets thin and the ground stays soft year-round. It's a strange place, like a piece of Canada that got lost and ended up in West Virginia. The water there is dark as coffee from all the old plant matter, and some of those pools are so deep nobody's ever found the bottom. The morning I headed out to look for Dr. Henley, frost covered everything like white paint. My breath came out in puffs and my fingers were already getting cold through my gloves. October can be mean up in the mountains. One day it's warm enough to hike in a t-shirt, the next day winter shows up without knocking. I'd been walking for maybe 2 hours when I first saw something odd. There, right beside the trail, was a patch of flowers that shouldn't exist. Bright red blooms, each one perfectly round, growing in a neat little circle. I'd never seen anything like them in all my years walking these woods. Being a careful man, I got out my camera and took a picture. Then I got out my notebook and drew them, marking the exact spot on my trail map. That's what you do when you find something new in the wilderness. You document it, you make it official. But as I knelt there drawing, something bothered me about those flowers. They were too perfect, too bright. And when the wind blew, they didn't move like normal flowers do. They stayed perfectly still, like they were made of something heavier than petals. I should have turned back then. Should have reported the strange flowers and let someone else look for Dr. Henley. But I was the senior ranger, and it was my job to bring that professor home safe. The trail got worse as I climbed higher. Fallen trees blocked the path, and the wooden bridges over the streams were slippery with ice. By noon, I was deep in country where most people never go. The kind of place where you can walk for days without seeing another human being. That's when I found Dr. Henley's camp. His tent was still standing, but the sides were ripped open like giant claws had torn through them. His sleeping bag was there, along with his books and plant collecting tools. But no Dr. Henley. What scared me most were his photographs. They were scattered all around the campsite, dozens of them. All pictures of flowers, but not normal flowers. These looked like the red ones I'd found by the trail, except bigger. Much bigger. And in some of the photos, you could see shapes that looked almost like bones. I picked up one photograph and looked at it close. There, growing up through the center of a flower that was easily 2 feet across, was what looked exactly like a human finger bone. White and smooth, but definitely bone. Dr. Henley had written notes on the back of the photo. Day 3, impossible growth rate. Specimens appear to be incorporating calcium deposits from unknown source. We'll investigate further tomorrow. There was no tomorrow note. I searched the area around his camp for 2 more hours but found no trace of the man himself. What I did find were more of those strange flowers, getting bigger and stranger the deeper I went into the bog. Some were 3 feet across now, and they all had that same too perfect look, like they were made by something that had never seen a real flower but was trying its best to copy one. The sun was getting low when I decided to make camp. I set up my tent a good distance from Dr. Henley's torn shelter and built a small fire. The cold was coming down hard now, and my water bottle had ice forming around the edges. As I sat by the fire eating beans from a can, I kept looking at those photographs. Every single picture showed flowers with bone-like growths inside them. Finger bones, toe bones, pieces that looked like ribs. It was like some twisted garden where bones grew instead of seeds. The old-timers back in town sometimes told stories about bone gardens in the deep woods. Said the Cherokee used to warn people about certain places where the dead grew up from the ground like crops. I'd always figured it was just talk, stories made up to keep kids from wandering too far from home. But looking at Dr. Henley's photographs, I wasn't so sure anymore. The fire burned low as full darkness came on. Somewhere out in the bog, nightbirds were calling. But their sounds seemed wrong somehow, like they were trying too hard to sound normal, like something else was making those noises and doing a poor job of copying real birds. I banked the fire and crawled into my sleeping bag, but sleep wouldn't come. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw those flowers with their bone-white centers staring back at me. I woke up to silence. That might not sound scary, but in the woods, silence is never natural. There should be wind in the trees, water moving over rocks, small animals rustling in the leaves. But that morning, I couldn't hear anything at all. Even my own breathing seemed too loud. I unzipped my tent and looked out. Fog covered everything like a thick gray blanket. I could barely see 10 feet in any direction, but what I could see made my stomach drop. During the night, more flowers had grown. They were everywhere now, scattered. It around my campsite like someone had been planting seeds while I slept. Red flowers, Each one perfectly round, each one bigger than the ones I'd seen the day before. The smallest was the size of a dinner plate. The largest was bigger than a car tire. I got dressed fast and walked over to the nearest flower. Up close, I could see it was even stranger than Dr. Henley's photographs had shown. The petals looked real enough, but they felt wrong when I touched them. Too thick, too cold. And in the center, growing up like a strange pistil, was definitely a bone. A long, white bone that looked exactly like a human arm bone. I took more pictures, though my hands were shaking so bad I probably ruined half of them. Then I started packing up my camp. I needed to get back to town and report this. Whatever was happening here was way beyond anything I could handle alone. But when I tried to find the trail back, it wasn't there anymore. I walked in circles for an hour, checking my compass every few minutes. According to the needle, I was going the right direction. But every path I tried led to more bog, more of those twisted flowers. It was like the whole landscape had changed while I slept. That's when I heard the voice. Help me. It was faint, barely louder than a whisper. But it was definitely human. A man's voice, coming from somewhere deeper in the bog. Dr. Henley? I called out. Dr. Henley, is that you? Help me, the voice said again. It sounded weak, like someone who'd been hurt bad and couldn't speak much louder. I followed the sound, pushing through thick bushes and around deep pools of dark water. The fog was so heavy I could barely see where I was going. But that voice kept calling, always just a little bit ahead of me. Please, it said, I'm trapped. I found him near a cluster of the biggest flowers I'd seen yet. Each one was easily 6 feet across, with petals tied. Hat looked thick as leather. And there, tangled up in the stems and roots, was Dr. Henley. At least, I thought it was Dr. Henley. The man was alive, but barely. His clothes were torn and dirty, and his skin had a strange greenish color, like he'd been underwater too long. Thin roots and vines had wrapped around his arms and legs, holding him tight against the base of the largest flower. Thank God, he whispered when he saw me. I've been here for days. These things, they're not normal plants. They're something else. I got out my knife and started cutting the vines that held him. But as soon as I cut one, 2 more seemed to grow in its place. The whole flower cluster was alive, moving and shifting like it knew I was trying to free its prisoner. Stop, Dr. Henley said suddenly. Don't cut anymore. Why not? We need to get you out of here. He looked at me with eyes that were too bright, too wild. Because every time you cut them, they take more. Look at my hands. I looked down at his hands where they were wrapped in vines. His fingers were thin and white, like they were made of bone instead of flesh. As I watched, one of his fingernails fell off and dropped to the ground. Underneath was something that looked like a thorn. It's been feeding on me, he whispered, taking my calcium, my bones, everything that makes me human. And in return, it's making me part of itself. The largest flower, the one he was pressed against, slowly opened wider. Inside, instead of normal flower parts, I could see what looked like a human rib cage made of white petals. It was beautiful and horrible at the same time. You have to leave, Dr. Henley said. His voice was getting weaker. Before it notices you too. But it was already too late for that. I felt something wrap around my ankle and looked down to see a thin green vine curling up my leg. When I tried to pull it off, it tightened like a snake. More vines started reaching for me from the other flowers, moving slow but steady. I cut myself free and backed away, but there were flowers all around me now. The fog was lifting, and I could see that the entire bog had changed overnight. What had been normal wetland yesterday was now a garden of those bone flowers, stretching in every direction as far as I could see. And in the distance, moving between the giant blooms, was something that definitely wasn't human. It was tall, maybe 12 feet, and covered in moss and fungus like an old tree that had learned to walk. Its arms were too long and its fingers ended in points that looked like thorns. When it moved, the flowers all turned to follow it like they were watching their master. Dr. Henley saw it too. The gardener, he whispered. It's been here longer than the bog itself, longer than the mountains. It plants human bones and grows new servants. The creature hadn't seen us yet, but it was moving closer. With each step, more flowers bloomed in its footprints. I grabbed what was left of my gear and ran. Behind me, I could hear Dr. Henley calling out, but his voice was already changing, becoming something that didn't sound quite human anymore. I ran through the bog like the devil himself was chasing me, and maybe he was. Every step I took, more of those bone flowers sprouted from the ground. It was like the whole wetland was waking up, turning from a normal place into something out of a nightmare. The thing Dr. Henley had called the gardener was following me. I couldn't see it through the fog, but I could hear it moving, a wet, sliding sound like giant roots pulling through mud. And wherever it went, those flowers sang. It was the strangest thing. Each flower made a soft, humming sound, like wind through a bottle. But when you put them all together, hundreds of them, it sounded almost like human voices, like a choir of people who'd forgotten how to be people. I tried to follow my compass back toward the trail, but nothing looked familiar anymore. The streams had moved. The hills were in the wrong places. Even the trees looked different, taller and darker, with branches that hung down like curtains. That's when I found the other campsites. The first one was maybe 50 years old. Canvas tent so rotted I could put my finger right through it. But the bones inside were still white and clean, arranged in neat piles like someone had been sorting them. On a flat rock nearby, carved in shaky letters, were the words, "My name was James Morrison. The garden has me now." The second campsite was newer, maybe 10 or 15 years old. A newer tent, better gear, but the same neat piles of bones and the same kind of message carved into a tree. I was Sarah Chen. I came to study the bog. Now I feed it. There were more camps scattered through the area. Lots more. Some so old the bones had turned yellow. Some so new I could still smell the decay. Each one had a name carved somewhere, like the person wanted to be remembered even after the bog took everything else. But the worst part was what I found growing near each campsite. The bones weren't just piled up. They were sprouting. Little green shoots were growing right out of finger bones and ribs, like the skeletons were seeds that had been planted in human soil. And as those shoots grew taller, they formed buds that would bloom into more of those bone flowers. I understood then what Dr. Henley had been trying to tell me. This wasn't just some strange plant. It was a farming operation. The gardener collected people, used their bones to grow more flowers, and those flowers attracted more people. It had been going on for decades, maybe centuries. The fog was getting thicker as afternoon came on, and the humming from the flowers was getting louder. I could barely see where I was going, but I kept moving, hoping to find some way out of this twisted garden. That's when I heard the voices. "Gus," someone called. It sounded like my wife Mary, who died 2 years ago from cancer. "Gus, I'm over here. I've been waiting for you." I knew it couldn't be real, but my heart jumped anyway. Mary had always loved flowers. She'd spent hours in our garden back home, coaxing roses and daisies to bloom even in the worst soil. "Don't listen," I told myself. "It's just the bog playing tricks." But then I heard another voice I recognized. Tom Bradley, my old partner who'd died in a climbing accident 5 years back. "Come on, Gus," Tom's voice called from somewhere in the fog. "We're all here waiting. It's not so bad once you get used to it." The voices were coming from the flowers themselves. I could see them opening and closing their petals like mouths, and each time they opened, another familiar voice called out to me. My father, who taught me to love the woods, my old dog Rex, somehow making human words, my brother Danny, who drowned when we were kids. All of them calling to me, telling me to come closer, to sit down and rest, to let the garden take care of me. I started running again, hands over my ears, but the voices followed me. They got louder and more desperate, like people I'd loved were really trapped in those flowers and needed me to save them. And maybe they were. The gardener appeared out of the fog ahead of me, blocking my path. Up close, it was even more horrible than I'd thought. What I'd taken for moss was actually human hair that had turned green and stringy. What looked like fungus growing from its joints were actually small bone flowers blooming right out of its body. It had been human once, long ago, but the bog had changed it, made it into something else, something that could tend this awful garden and help it grow. When it spoke, its voice sounded like wind through dead leaves. "Welcome, Ranger Ironwood," it said. "I have been preparing a place for you." It pointed with one thorny finger toward a spot where the largest flower I'd seen yet was just beginning to bloom. The bud was enormous, big enough to hold a full-grown man, and it was opening slowly, like a mouth getting ready to swallow something. "Your expertise will be valuable," the gardener continued. "You know these mountains better than anyone. You can help me plant my garden in new places, bring it to new people." Around me, the bone flowers were humming louder, and I could feel their roots moving under the ground, reaching toward my feet. The voices of everyone I'd ever loved were calling me to come closer, to stop fighting, to let the garden make me part of something beautiful and eternal. For just a moment, I almost did it. I was tired and cold, and so very alone. The idea of joining Mary and Tom and all the others didn't seem so bad. At least I wouldn't be lonely anymore. But then I remembered something my grandfather had told me when I was just a boy. He'd been a ranger too, back in the old days when the job meant something different. "Gus," he'd said, "there are places in these mountains that aren't meant for people. Places where the old things still live. If you ever find yourself in one of those places, remember, you're not just fighting for yourself. You're fighting for everyone who might come after you." I thought about all the hikers and scientists and photographers who would come to these mountains in the years ahead. Kids on camping trips, families on vacation, people like Dr. Henley who just wanted to study the natural world. They deserve better than to end up as fertilizer for this nightmare garden. I pulled out my camera and popped off the flash. The sudden bright light made the gardener stumble backward, and the flower singing stopped for just a moment. In that moment of silence, I heard something else. The sound of running water, real water, not the thick black stuff that flowed through the bog. I ran toward the sound as the gardener roared behind me like wind through a burned forest. The sound of clean water led me to a stream I actually recognized, Beaver Creek, which meant I was only about 3 miles from the main trail. But 3 miles might as well have been 300, because the gardener and its bone flowers are everywhere now. They'd grown so thick I could barely see the ground. Flowers the size of wagon wheels bloomed between the trees, their bone-white centers reaching up like grasping fingers. And from each one came those voices, all the people the bog had taken over the years, calling for me to join them. The worst part was, some of them were starting to sound right. "You're just delaying the inevitable," called a voice that sounded like Dr. Henley, though it was coming from a flower near my feet. "Why make this harder than it has to be?" My camera flash had bought me maybe 5 minutes, but the gardener was catching up. I could hear it crashing through the undergrowth behind me, and with each step it took, more flowers bloomed in its wake. But something else was happening too. The temperature was dropping fast. My breath was coming out in thick clouds, and ice was starting to form on the flower petals. A killing frost was moving down from the high peaks, the kind that could freeze a man solid in an hour if he wasn't careful. The flowers didn't like the cold. As the temperature dropped, their humming got quieter and their petals started to curl inward. Some of the smaller ones actually seemed to be shrinking, pulling their roots deeper into the warmer ground. That gave me an idea. I stopped running and started climbing. There was a rocky outcrop ahead, maybe 30 feet high, that would put me above most of the bog. If I could get up there and wait for the frost to do its work, maybe I could outlast this thing. The climb was harder than I expected. My fingers were getting numb from the cold, and ice was forming on the rock face. But behind me, the gardener was struggling too. Its moss-covered body was stiffening up as the temperature dropped, and it moved slower with each step. Halfway up the cliff, I looked back and saw something amazing. The bone flowers were dying. The ones that had been 6 feet across were shrinking down to the size of dinner plates. The voices calling from them were getting weaker, more distant, and the gardener itself was moving. like an old man with arthritis, its joints creaking with every step. Whatever this thing was, it needed warmth to survive. The killing frost was doing what my knife and my camera flash couldn't. It was hurting the bog itself. I reached the top of the outcrop just as the gardener arrived at the bottom. It looked up at me with eyes like black pools, and when it spoke, its voice cracked like ice breaking. "The cold won't last," it said. "It never does. And when spring comes, my garden will be stronger than ever. I will plant you in the deepest soil, Ranger Ironwood, where your bones can feed my flowers for 100 years. But I wasn't listening anymore. I was looking at my hands, and what I saw there made my blood run even colder than the mountain air. My fingernails were loose. As I watched, one of them fell off and clattered on the rocks. Underneath was something white and hard like a thorn made of bone. The bog had been working on me too. Even though I'd been running, even though I'd been fighting, it had been changing me little by little. Probably started the moment I'd touched that first flower by the trail. How long before I ended up like Dr. Henley, more plant than human? How long before I became another voice calling from the bone flowers, trying to lure other people into this nightmare? The gardener started climbing the cliff. It moved slow in the cold, but it was still coming. And I knew that if it reached me, if it touched me with those thorny fingers, the change would happen fast. I'd become part of its garden before the frost could save me. I had one chance. One desperate, probably stupid chance. I got out my camera and popped the flashbulb. Not at the gardener this time, but at myself. The bright light burned my eyes and made me see spots, but it also showed me something important. The exact shape of the cliff I was standing on. Then I jumped. Not down to Yao, over the gardener, but across to another rocky outcrop about 15 feet away. It was a gap I never would have tried in daylight, when I could see exactly how far it was. But sometimes not knowing how dangerous something is makes it possible to do. I hit the other side hard, rolled, and felt something in my shoulder pop. But I was alive, and I was farther from the gardener than I'd been in hours. The cold was getting worse. My water bottle had frozen solid, and ice crystals were forming in my beard. But the bone flowers were shrinking faster now, and the gardener was moving so slowly it looked like a statue that had learned to walk. I started down the other side of the mountain, following Beaver Creek toward the main trail. Every step was painful. My shoulder was definitely dislocated, but I kept moving. Behind me I could hear the gardener calling out in that wind-through-leaves voice, but it sounded weaker now, more distant. By the time I reached the main trail, the sun was coming up and the worst of the frost was lifting, but the damage had been done. When I looked back toward the bog, I could see the bone flowers had withered down to nothing more than brown stubs sticking up from the frozen ground. The gardener was gone. Maybe dead. Maybe just sleeping until warmer weather came. But for now, at least, its nightmare garden was finished. I made it back to my truck and drove straight to the ranger station. Told them I'd found Dr. Henley's body in a sinkhole, which wasn't exactly a lie, since what I'd seen wasn't really him anymore. Told them the area was dangerous because of toxic bog gases and it needed to be closed off until we could study it properly. Nobody questioned an old ranger's judgment. They put up warning signs and barriers, and as far as I know, nobody's been back there since. That was more than 60 years ago, but I still wake up some nights thinking about those bone flowers and their terrible singing. My shoulder never healed right from that jump. The doctors said the bones had been compromised somehow, like something had been eating away at the calcium. They had to put in metal pins to hold it together. I never told them about the fingernail that fell off, or the 3 others I pulled out myself over the next few weeks. They grew back normal, eventually, but for a while there, I wasn't sure if I was still entirely human. The official report said that Dr. Henley had been overcome by methane gases from the bog and fallen into one of the deep pools. His body was never recovered. The area was declared off-limits to hikers and researchers, and as far as the public knows, it still is. But I know better. Every spring, when the weather warms up, I get the urge to go back there. It starts as just a little itch in the back of my mind, but it gets stronger as the days get longer. By summer, it's all I can think about. I hear voices in my dreams, Mary's voice, Tom's voice, all the people I've lost over the years, calling me to come back to the garden. Some years the urge is so strong I actually drive out to the old trailhead. I sit in my truck looking at the warning signs and the barriers, and I think about how easy it would be to just walk past them, to go back to that beautiful, terrible place where the bone flowers bloom. But I don't go. Not yet. Other rangers have reported strange things over the years. Hikers who claim they heard singing coming from the restricted area. Photographers who swear they've seen flowers that shouldn't exist, growing too big and too bright in impossible places. And sometimes on very cold nights when the killing frost comes down from the peaks, people say they can hear something roaring in the distance. Something angry and old, calling out across the mountains in a voice like wind through dead leaves. I always listen when they tell those stories, and I always make sure the barriers are still in place, the warning signs still posted, because I know that someday, maybe when I am too old to fight anymore, I'll walk past those barriers. I'll follow the old trail back into the bog, and I'll find whatever's left of the gardener's nightmare garden. Maybe the bone flowers will welcome me like an old friend. Maybe I'll finally get to see Mary again, and Tom, and all the others who've been waiting for me all these years. Or maybe the killing frost will come again, just when I need it most. I guess I'll find out when the time comes. Until then, I keep watching the mountains. I keep listening to the stories. And I keep making sure that nobody else walks into that beautiful, terrible garden where human bones grow like flowers and the voices of the lost call out across the bog. Because that's what rangers do. We protect people from the wild places, even the wild places that want to protect us right back. Found among the papers of Augustus Gus Ironwood, 1906 to 1987, former senior ranger, Monongahela National Forest. Mr. Ironwood served with distinction for 41 years before retiring in 1985. The events described in this account have not been verified, but the Cranberry Glades area referenced remains closed to public access due to environmental concerns. My name is Ezekiel Ashwood, but everyone calls me Zeke. I've been a forest ranger for 21 years, and in 3 months I'm supposed to retire. I say supposed to, because after what happened on Mount Rogers, I'm not sure I'll live that long. I'm writing this down because people need to know what's really out there in the woods. The official report says I suffered from severe hypothermia and had hallucinations. That's a lie. What I saw was real, and it's still hunting. Mount Rogers is the highest peak in Virginia. It sits in Jefferson National Forest like a sleeping giant, covered in thick trees and meadows that stretch up to the sky. I've been working these mountains since I was 37 years old. I know every trail, every creek, every cave. At least I thought I did. November 15th, 1996. That's when it started. The leaves had already fallen and the air was sharp with cold. Deer season was starting, which meant hunters would be coming up the mountain soon. My job was to do one final survey of the remote areas before I handed over my badge. I should have known something was wrong when I found the first deer. It was lying in a small clearing about 3 miles up the main trail. At first I thought a hunter had shot it and left it behind, which made me angry. You don't waste an animal like that. But when I got closer, I saw there were no bullet holes, no blood. The deer looked like it had just laid down and died. It was a big buck, maybe 8 points. Its eyes were still clear, not cloudy like they get when an animal's been dead for a while. Its fur was perfect. Even its tongue was still pink, but it was definitely dead. I poked it with a stick and it didn't move. No breathing, no heartbeat when I pressed my ear to its chest. The weird thing was how peaceful it looked. Most dead animals look scared or hurt. This one looked like it had just decided to take a nap and never woke up. I made notes in my logbook and took some pictures. Maybe it had eaten something poisonous, or maybe it had some kind of heart problem. Animals die in the woods all the time. That's just nature. But as I kept walking, I found more. A rabbit by the creek. A squirrel at the base of an oak tree. 2 more deer near the ridgeline. All dead. All perfect. All looking like they had just laid down for a peaceful sleep. I've seen a lot of dead animals in my time. Ones hit by cars, killed by other animals, or just old and sick. This was different. These animals looked Chosen. By the time the sun was setting, I had counted 12 dead animals, all in a rough circle around the peak of Mount Rogers, all perfectly preserved, all looking like they had died happy. I set up my camp in a small meadow where I'd stayed dozens of times before. The silence was the first thing I noticed. Usually the woods are full of sounds at night: owls hooting, raccoons chattering, mice rustling in the leaves. But that night, it was quiet as a grave. I built a fire and heated up a can of beans. The flames danced and crackled, but they seemed smaller than usual, like something was swallowing up the light. I kept looking over my shoulder, feeling like someone was watching me. But every time I turned around, there was nothing but darkness. That's when I smelled it for the first time. It wasn't a bad smell, not like rotting meat or garbage. It was sweet, like flowers at a funeral, like the air in a room where someone had died peacefully in their sleep. It drifted through the trees, getting stronger and weaker like breathing. I told myself it was just my imagination. 21 years in the forest, and I'd never been spooked by a few dead animals and a strange smell. Death omens were just old mountain superstition, the kind of stories Cherokee elders told to scare kids. But as I sat by my dying fire, looking up at the stars, I couldn't shake the feeling that something had changed. Something had come to Mount Rogers, and it was watching me. I didn't sleep much that night. The next morning, I woke up to find my campfire still burning. That should have been impossible. I had let it die down to embers before I went to sleep. I always do. Fire safety is the first thing they teach you as a ranger. But there it was, flames dancing cheerfully like someone had been feeding it wood all night. Fresh logs were stacked next to the fire pit. Good, dry oak that would burn clean and hot. I sure as hell hadn't put them there. I looked around my campsite for footprints or any sign that someone had been there. The ground was soft from the morning dew, perfect for showing tracks. I found my own boot prints from the night before, but that was it. No human prints, no animal prints, nothing. The logs were arranged in a perfect stack, like someone had taken a lot of care to make them look nice. Each piece was exactly the same length. The bark had been stripped off in neat spirals. I picked up one of the logs and examined it. The wood was warm, like it had been sitting by a fire for hours. But it was also strange. Too perfect. Too smooth. When I looked closely, I could see what looked like writing carved into the surface. Not letters or words, but symbols that hurt my eyes to look at. I threw the log into the fire and watched it burn. It went up fast, with flames that were too blue and smoke that smelled like that sweet death smell from the night before. That's when I heard the voice. "Good morning, Ezekiel." I spun around, hand going to the pistol on my belt. There was nobody there. Just trees and rocks and the morning mist. "Who's there?" I called out. My voice echoed off the rocks, but nobody answered. I waited for 10 minutes, listening hard. Nothing. Just the wind in the trees and the sound of my own heartbeat. I packed up my gear and started walking. My job was to survey the north side of the peak, an area I'd been to maybe 3 times in all my years as a ranger. It was rough country, full of steep rocks and thick trees. Most people never went there because there were no trails. As I walked, I started finding more dead animals. But these were different from the ones I'd found the day before. These ones had been arranged. A circle of rabbits, all facing inward like they were having a meeting. A family of raccoons lined up by size, from biggest to smallest. 2 owls perched on a branch, wings spread wide like they were trying to hug the whole forest. Each arrangement was like a work of art. Someone had taken a lot of time and care to make them look just right. But who would do something like that? And why? I took more pictures and made more notes. My hands were shaking a little as I wrote. Not from the cold, but from something else. Something that was starting to feel like fear. Around noon, I stopped for lunch by a small stream. The water was clear and cold, running over smooth rocks that had been worn down by thousands of years of current. I sat on a fallen log and ate a sandwich, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. That's when I noticed the carvings. They were cut deep into the trees all around the stream. Not random scratches, but careful, deliberate symbols. The same symbols I'd seen on the firewood that morning. They covered every tree trunk I could see, from ground level up to about 7 feet high. And in the middle of all those strange symbols, carved into the biggest oak tree, was my name, Ezekiel Ashwood. My full name, spelled out in perfect letters about 6 inches tall. The cuts in the bark were fresh, with sap still bleeding from the wounds. But I'd never been to this exact spot before. I was sure of it. I touched the letters with my finger. The carving was deep, like someone had used a very sharp knife and taken their time. Below my name, there were more symbols, and below those, a date, December 7th, 1996, 3 weeks from today. The day I was supposed to retire. I backed away from the tree, my heart pounding. This was impossible. Nobody knew I was up here. I hadn't told anyone my exact route or where I planned to camp. And even if someone had followed me, how could they have carved my name into a tree I'd never visited? I pulled out my radio and tried to call the ranger station. Static. I climbed up to higher ground and tried again. Nothing but white noise. The radio had worked fine yesterday. As I stood there trying to get a signal, I heard something moving in the trees behind me. Not the normal sounds of a squirrel or bird. Something big. Something that was trying to be quiet, but not quite managing it. I turned around slowly, my hand on my gun. There, about 50 feet away, stood the biggest man I'd ever seen. He was at least 7 feet tall, with shoulders like a football player and arms that looked strong enough to break trees in half. He was dressed like a hunter, with camouflage pants and a brown jacket. His face was hidden under the shadow of a wide-brimmed hat. "You're early," he said. His voice was deep and smooth, like an old friend talking about the weather. "Early for what?" I asked, not moving my hand away from my gun. The man tilted his head, and I caught a glimpse of his face under the hat. What I saw made my blood run cold. His skin was pale as winter, and his eyes were completely black. Not dark brown or dark blue. Black as empty space. "Early for the hunt," he said. "But don't worry, we have time to prepare." I blinked and he was gone. Not gone like he had walked away or hidden behind a tree. Gone like he had never been there at all. I ran back to my campsite as fast as I could, crashing through bushes and jumping over rocks. I didn't stop until I reached my tent. Then I sat down hard on the ground and tried to catch my breath. My hands were shaking so bad I could barely hold my pen as I wrote in my logbook. But I had to write it down. I had to have some record of what was happening. That night I built my fire boughs, bigger than usual, and kept my gun in my lap. The sweet smell of death was stronger now, drifting through the trees like fog. And somewhere in the darkness, I could hear something walking in circles around my camp. Something big, something that was waiting for December 7th. I didn't sleep at all that second night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw those black holes where the man's eyes should have been. Every sound in the forest made me jump. By morning, I was exhausted and scared, but I was also angry. I've been dealing with people who think they can intimidate me for over 20 years. Poachers, drug dealers, idiots who think federal land belongs to them. I wasn't about to be scared off by some freak in the woods, no matter how tall he was or how weird his eyes looked. I decided to hike down to the ranger station and get help. Whatever was going on up here, I needed backup and better communication equipment. But when I started walking down the trail I'd used to get up the mountain, something was wrong. The trail was gone. Not overgrown or blocked by fallen trees. Just gone. Where there should have been a clear path winding down through the forest, there were only thick trees and steep rocks. I walked back and forth for an hour, looking for any sign of the trail I'd used just 2 days before. Nothing. I tried going in different directions, looking for any way off the mountain that didn't involve climbing down rock faces that would kill me if I fell. But every direction I went, the forest got thicker and the rocks got steeper. It was like the mountain had grown bigger overnight, like someone had stretched it out so I couldn't find the edges. My radio was still dead. My GPS unit kept spinning, unable to find satellites. According to my compass, north was in 3 different directions depending on where I stood. I was trapped. By noon, I had accepted that something very wrong was happening on Mount Rogers. This wasn't just a weird coincidence or someone playing pranks. The rules of the normal world weren't working up here anymore. I went back to my campsite and found another present waiting for me. Sitting on a flat rock next to my tent was a rifle. Not just any rifle, but a beautiful old hunting gun with a wooden stock that gleamed like it had just been polished. There was a note tied to the barrel with leather string. The note was written in the same careful handwriting I'd seen carved into the trees. For the hunt. You'll need this soon. H. I picked up the rifle and examined it. It was heavier than my service pistol, but it felt perfect in my hands, like it had been made just for me. The metal was warm to the touch, and when I looked down the barrel, it was perfectly clean. There was a box of ammunition sitting next to where the rifle had been. Big bullets that looked like they could stop a charging bear. I'd never seen bullets quite like these before. They were silver in color, and they felt cold even though everything else was warm. I should have thrown the rifle away, should have left it on the rock and walked back into the trees. But something inside me, some instinct I'd developed after 21 years in the forest, told me I was going to need it. That afternoon, I started seeing things that weren't there. Movement in the corner of my eye that disappeared when I turned to look. Shadows that fell in the wrong direction. Trees that I swear hadn't been there 5 minutes before. And faces in the bark. Every tree I looked at had them. Faces of people I'd known over the years, carved into the wood like someone had pressed human heads into the trunk while it was still growing. I saw my ex-wife Linda, who'd left me 5 years ago because I spent too much time in the woods. I saw my old partner Jim, who'd died in a car accident 3 winters back. I saw my father, who'd passed when I was still a kid. All of them were looking at me. All of them had the same expression, like they were trying to warn me about something. But couldn't speak. As the sun started to set, the faces began to move. Their eyes would follow me as I walked. Their mouths would open and close like they were trying to say something important. When the wind blew, I could almost hear whispers coming from the trees. I built my fire early and sat with my back against a big rock so nothing could sneak up behind me. The rifle lay across my knees, loaded and ready. I'd decided that when the tall man came back, I was going to shoot first and ask questions later. But he didn't come back. Instead, something else came. Just after dark, I heard singing. It was a woman's voice, high and sweet, singing a song I almost recognized, like a lullaby my mother might have sung when I was very small. The voice came from somewhere in the trees to my left, maybe 100 yards away. I called out, "Hello? Are you okay? Do you need help?" The singing stopped for a moment. Then the voice called back, "Zeke? Is that you? I've been looking for you." It was Linda, my ex-wife Linda, who lived 300 miles away in Richmond and hadn't spoken to me in 2 years. "Linda?" I stood up, holding the rifle. "What are you doing up here?" "I came to find you," her voice said. "I was wrong to leave. I want to try again." She sounded exactly like she had when we were married, before the fights and the silence and the papers being signed, when we were still happy. "Come into the light," I said. "Let me see you." "I can't," Linda's voice said. "I'm hurt. I fell on some rocks. Can you come help me?" Every instinct I had told me not to leave my fire. But it was Linda's voice, the woman I'd loved for 12 years. If she was really hurt, I took a step toward the trees. "That's it," the voice said. "Just a little further. I'm right here." I took another step. The firelight was behind me now, and the darkness ahead seemed to swallow up everything. That is when I realized the voice was wrong. Linda had a small scar on her throat from when she'd had her tonsils out as a kid. It made her voice a little rough, especially when she was tired or scared. This voice was too perfect, too smooth. I raised the rifle and pointed it toward where the voice was coming from. "You're not Linda," I said. The singing started again, but now it was different, louder. And there wasn't just one voice anymore. There were dozens of them, all singing the same song, men, women, children. all the voices of people I'd known and cared about over the years. They were all around me now, in every direction, calling my name, asking me to come help them, telling me they loved me and missed me. I backed toward my fire, sweeping the rifle back and forth. "Stay back! I know what you are!" The voices got louder, more desperate. Then they started screaming. Not screaming in pain or fear, screaming in anger. Screaming like wild animals that had been denied their prey. I reached my fire and grabbed a burning stick, holding it up like a torch. The light pushed back the darkness, and the screaming stopped. But in the silence that followed, I heard something worse. Footsteps, heavy ones, coming toward my camp from every direction. The hunt had begun. The footsteps circled my camp all night, but they never came close enough for me to see who was making them. Every time I pointed my torch or rifle toward a sound, the footsteps would stop. When I looked away, they started again. As dawn broke, the sounds faded away. But they left something behind. Tracks, hundreds of them, pressed deep into the soft ground around my campsite. Human footprints, but wrong. Too long, with toes that ended in points like claws, and they were all facing inward, toward my fire. I followed one set of tracks away from the camp. They led to a clearing I'd never seen before, even though I was sure I'd walked through this area yesterday. In the center of the clearing was a circle of standing stones, each one about 8 feet tall and covered in those same symbols I'd been seeing, everywhere. The tall man was waiting for me there. In the daylight, he looked different. Less like a person and more like something pretending to be a person. His skin was too pale, like he'd never seen the sun. His clothes were old-fashioned, like something a hunter might have worn 50 years ago. And his eyes were still those endless black holes. "You've been chosen, Ezekiel," he said. His voice echoed strangely in the clearing, like he was speaking from the bottom of a deep well. "Chosen for what?" I kept the rifle pointed at his chest, though I had a feeling bullets wouldn't do much good. "For the final hunt," he said. "The greatest honor a hunter can receive." He walked slowly around the circle of stones, and I turned to keep him in sight. As he moved, the symbols on the stones began to glow with a soft red light. "I am the hunter of last things," he said. "I come to those who are ready to end their story with dignity. You have lived well, Ezekiel. You have protected these mountains, respected the balance between life and death. Now it is time for your final test." "I'm not ready to die," I said. He smiled, and his teeth were too sharp. "Everyone says that, but you've been preparing for this moment your entire career. Every animal you've found dead in the woods, every person you've helped in their final moments, every time you've faced danger and survived, it has all been leading to this." The red light from the stones was getting brighter. I could feel heat coming off them, like they were made of fire instead of rock. "Your choice is simple," the hunter said. "Accept the hunt with honor, and your death will have meaning. Refuse, and everyone you've ever cared about will take your place." Images began appearing in the glowing stones. Linda, working in her garden in Richmond. My old partner Jim's widow, Sarah, reading to her grandchildren. My nephew, Tommy, away at college. All the people I'd known and loved over the years. "They will die badly," the hunter said. "Slowly, in pain and fear, unless you take their place." I'd spent my whole career protecting people. It's what rangers do. We put ourselves between danger and the innocent, even if it costs us everything. But looking at this creature, this thing that wasn't human, I realized something important. It was lying. "You can't hurt them," I said. "You're stuck here, on this mountain. That's why you need me to choose." The hunter stopped walking. The smile faded from his face. "You can only take people who come to you," I continued. "People who are already facing death. People who are at the end of their story. That's why all those animals looked peaceful. They were ready to die anyway." The red light flickered. "But I'm not ready," I said. "My story isn't over yet. I have 3 more months before retirement. 3 more months of work to do." "Your work is finished," the hunter snarled. "You were supposed to die in 2 weeks. Heart attack, alone in these woods. I have seen it." Maybe that was going to happen, I said, but not anymore. I raised the rifle and fired. The bullet hit the hunter in the chest and passed right through him like he was made of smoke. But the sound of the gunshot did something to the stones. The red light went out all at once, and the symbols stopped glowing. The hunter looked surprised, maybe even afraid. "You cannot change what is written," he said, but his voice was weaker now. "Watch me," I said. I fired again, this time at the largest stone. The silver bullet hit it dead center, and the stone exploded in a shower of red sparks. The hunter screamed, and his shape began to blur and shift. I kept firing, destroying one stone after another. With each shot, the hunter became more transparent, more like a shadow than a solid thing. When the last stone fell, he was barely visible. "This is not over," he whispered. "Death comes for everyone eventually." "Yeah," I said, "but not today." He faded away like morning mist, and suddenly I could hear normal forest sounds again. Birds singing, squirrels chattering, the wind in the leaves. The sweet smell of death was gone, replaced by the clean scent of pine trees and fresh air. I found the trail back down the mountain right where it should have been. I walked out of those woods on November 20th, 1996, 5 days after I'd planned to return. The other rangers had been looking for me, but they'd searched in all the wrong places. According to them, I'd never climbed Mount Rogers at all. My truck had been found in the parking lot at a different trailhead entirely. The photos I'd taken showed normal forest scenes, dead animals, but nothing unusual, just natural deaths that happen in the woods every day. My notes about the stone circle and the carved names had somehow changed to routine observations about wildlife and trail conditions. But I knew what I'd seen, and I knew it wasn't over. The doctor said I'd suffered from severe hypothermia and hallucinations. Exposure to cold can make people see and hear things that aren't there. That's the official explanation, and it's easier for everyone if we stick to it. But there are changes I can't explain to the doctors. My hair turned completely white during those 5 days on the mountain. Not gray, white, like snow. And I walk with a cane now, though x-rays show nothing wrong with my bones or joints. I just feel older, like I aged 20 years in less than a week. The strangest change is what I see when I look at people. Sometimes when I'm talking to someone, I can see a shadow standing behind them, a dark shape that looks almost like the hunter, but not quite. It's always there when someone is about to die. Not right away, but within the next few weeks or months. I tried to warn people at first, told them to see doctors, to be careful driving, to watch their health. Most of them thought I was crazy. Few listened and found problems early. Cancer that could be treated, heart conditions that could be managed. I couldn't save everyone. Death has its own schedule, but I helped some people get more time with their families. That has to count for something. I retired on schedule December 7th, 1996, the date that had been carved into the tree. But I didn't die that day. Instead, I started a new job as a volunteer at the county hospital, helping families say goodbye to their loved ones. It turns out that facing death taught me how to help others face it too. I still go back to Mount Rogers sometimes. The stone circle is gone. There's just a normal clearing where it used to be, but I can feel something watching from the trees, waiting. The hunter of last things is still there, looking for people who are ready for their final hunt. I'm not ready yet. I may never be ready, but I'm not afraid of him anymore. Because I learned something important during those 5 days in the woods. Death isn't the enemy. Fear is the enemy. And once you stop being afraid to live, death loses most of its power over you. My name is Ezekiel Ashwood. I was supposed to die on Mount Rogers in November of 1996. Instead, I chose to keep living. Sometimes that's the bravest thing you can do. And if you're ever hiking alone in the mountains of Virginia, and you find dead animals arranged in perfect circles, and you smell something sweet drifting through the trees, don't follow voices that sound like people you know. Don't accept gifts left by your campfire. And remember that no matter what tries to convince you otherwise, your story isn't over until you say it is. The hunt only ends when you choose to stop running. My name is Delilah Nightshade, but everyone calls me Del. I've been a park ranger for 6 years now, and I thought I'd seen everything the Cherokee National Forest could throw at me. Poachers, drug dealers, lost hikers who think they're smarter than Mother Nature, you name it. But what happened that summer of 1977 in Joyce Kilmer Memorial Forest changed everything I thought I knew about this world. The heat was killing us that June. 95 degrees every day, with humidity so thick you could practically drink the air. The ancient poplar trees, some over 400 years old, created a green cathedral that should have been cool and peaceful. Instead, it felt like walking through a wet blanket someone had left in the sun. I was tracking the Hartwell family. 3 generations of poachers who'd been stealing ginseng from protected areas for decades. My boss, Ranger Mike Collins, had been trying to catch them for 2 years. They were smart, careful, and knew these woods better than most rangers. But I had something they didn't expect. I used to be a detective in Nashville before I fell in love with the wilderness. I knew how criminals think. The Hartwells weren't just stealing plants. They were part of something bigger, a network that reached all the way to buyers in Atlanta and Charlotte. Wild ginseng was worth more than gold to the right people, especially the old roots that grew in places like this. These trees had been here since before Columbus, and the ginseng that grew beneath them was ancient and powerful. I'd been following their trail for 3 days when I found their camp near Mirror Lake. The lake got its name from how perfectly still the water stayed, even in wind. Local Cherokee stories said it was a spirit place, somewhere you shouldn't look too long at your own reflection. I'd always figured that was just old folklore designed to keep people away from a dangerous area. The camp looked normal enough at first glance. 3 tents arranged in a triangle, cold fire pit in the center, clothes hanging on a makeshift line. But something felt wrong. I couldn't put my finger on it, but my detective instincts were screaming. I crouched behind a massive poplar and studied the scene. The Hartwells were there, old Eugene, his son Bobby, and Bobby's teenage boy Jake. They were sorting through burlap sacks, probably full of ginseng roots. Everything looked perfectly ordinary. Then I noticed the tents. They were identical. Not just the same brand or color, identical down to the smallest detail. Same tears in the same places. Same mud stains in the exact same patterns. Same rope tied in identical knots. I blinked hard and looked again. Maybe the heat was getting to me. But no, the tents were still perfect copies of each other. My hand started to shake as I raised my binoculars for a closer look. That's when I saw Eugene Hartwell wave at someone behind me. I spun around, my hand going to my sidearm, but there was nobody there. Just trees and shadows and the thick, still air. When I turned back to the camp, Eugene was looking right at me with a confused expression on his weathered face. "Afternoon, Ranger," he called out, like we were old friends. "Didn't expect to see you again so soon." Again? I'd never spoken to this man in my life. I stepped out from behind the tree, keeping my hand near my weapon, but trying to look casual. "Afternoon, Mr. Hartwell. Mind if we have a chat about what you're doing in a protected area?" Eugene scratched his gray beard and looked genuinely puzzled. "But Ranger, we already talked about this yesterday. You gave us permission to camp here while we helped with the trail maintenance." My blood went cold. I hadn't been in this part of the forest yesterday. I'd been 60 miles away dealing with a lost family of tourists near Gatlinburg. There was no way I could have given anyone permission for anything. "I think there's been some mistake," I said, stepping closer. "I wasn't here yesterday, Bobby." Hartwell looked up from his sorting. He was a man in his 40s with the same weathered features as his father. "Sure you were, Ranger Dell. You even complimented my boy Jake on his knot-tying skills." He pointed to his teenage son, who gave me a shy wave. Jake nodded eagerly. "You said I tied the best clove hitch you'd ever seen, remember? You were wearing that same uniform and everything." I looked down at my standard-issue Ranger uniform. Nothing special about it. Every ranger in the district wore the same thing. But the way Jake was looking at me with such certainty made my skin crawl. "What time was I here yesterday?" I asked, playing along while my mind raced. "About this time," Eugene said. "Maybe 4 o'clock or so. You stayed for about an hour, checked our permits, shared some coffee with us. You seemed real interested in our family history." This was impossible. At 4 o'clock yesterday, I'd been filing paperwork in the district office. I had witnesses. I had paperwork with timestamps. But these people seemed absolutely convinced they'd talk to me. "Tell me about our conversation," I said carefully. Eugene's eyes lit up. "Well, you asked about the old stories, the Cherokee legends about Mirror Lake. We told you about the spirit that lives in the water, how it shows you things that aren't quite right. You laughed and said you didn't believe in that stuff, but you seemed mighty interested all the same." I had never heard those stories, and I certainly hadn't laughed about Cherokee legends. I had too much respect for the history of this place. "You also asked about whether we'd seen anyone else in the area," Bobby added. "We told you about the strange campers we'd spotted a few days ago. Remember? The ones who set up 3 identical camps about a half-mile apart?" "Identical how?" I asked. "Same everything," Jake piped up. "Same tents, same gear, even the sea. AIM people. Looked like the same family had split into 3 groups, but that don't make sense, 'cause there was only 4 of them to begin with." My mouth went dry. 4 people? "Yeah," Eugene said. "A ranger and 3 civilians. The ranger looked just like—" He stopped talking and stared at me with growing alarm. "Just like you." The silence stretched between us, heavy as the humid air. A bird called somewhere in the canopy above, but it sounded wrong somehow. Too sharp, too mechanical. "Mr. Hartwell," I said slowly, "I need you and your family to pack up and leave this area immediately." "But you said we could stay," Bobby protested. "Yesterday you said it was fine as long as we didn't disturb the ginseng beds." "I don't care what I said yesterday. I'm telling you now. Pack up and get out." The 3 men exchanged glances. Eugene stepped forward, his hands visible, but his body language defensive. "Ranger, are you feeling all right? You seem different today." "Different." The word hung in the air like smoke. "I'm fine," I lied. "Just pack your things and head back to the main trail. Use the north route, not the path by the lake." "Why not the lake path?" Jake asked. "It's shorter." "Because something's wrong with that lake," I thought. "Because something's wrong with this whole situation, and every instinct I have is telling me to run." "Just do what I say," I told them. As I turned to leave, Eugene called out, "Ranger Dell? What should I tell the other ranger when she comes by?" I froze. "What other ranger?" "The one who's been coming around every evening this week. Looks just like you, sounds just like you. She said she was conducting a special investigation." The forest around me seemed to tilt. I felt dizzy, like the ground was shifting beneath my feet. What did this other ranger want to know? "Same things you asked yesterday," Eugene said. "About the legends, about the lake, about whether we'd seen anything unusual." I looked at the 3 men, father, son, and grandson, and saw my own fear reflected in their eyes. They were starting to understand that something was very wrong. "Get out of here," I whispered. "Get out now, and don't come back." They didn't argue. Within 10 minutes, they had their camp broken down and were heading north at a pace just short of running. I watched them disappear into the green shadows between the ancient trees. When they were gone, I was alone with the sound of my own heartbeat and the feeling that something was watching me from the direction of Mirror Lake. I should have left with the Hartwells. Every rational part of my mind was screaming at me to radio for backup, to get out of the area, to report what I'd heard and let someone else figure it out. But I was a detective before I was a ranger, and detective instincts die hard. I had to see that lake. The path wound through increasingly dense forest. The poplar trees grew so thick that sunlight could barely penetrate the canopy. The air grew cooler as I walked, but also heavier, like breathing through wet cloth. My radio crackled with static, then went silent completely. I tried to raise the district office. Nothing. I tried the emergency frequency. Static. Even my backup radio, a handheld unit I always carried, gave me nothing but white noise. The path curved sharply to the left, and suddenly I could see water through the trees. Mirror Lake stretched out before me, maybe 100 yards across, perfectly circular, like someone had carved it out with a giant spoon. The water was so still it looked like black glass. And there, On the far shore was another camp, my camp. I could see my own green tent, my own camping gear arranged exactly the way I always set it up. My coffee pot sat on a cold fire ring. My spare uniform hung from a branch to air dry. But I had never camped here in my life. I circled the lake carefully, staying in the tree line. As I got closer, I could see more details that made my skin crawl. There was my notebook, lying open on a camp table filled with handwriting that looked exactly like mine. There were my boots by the tent entrance, still muddy from yesterday's patrol that I had spent 60 miles away. I crept close enough to read what was written in the notebook. The entries were dated going back a week. June 14th, arrived at Mirror Lake. The Hartwells are cooperative. Ginseng operation is larger than anticipated. Need to investigate Cherokee legends about this area. June 15, spoke with Eugene Hartwell about local folklore. Something about a spirit in the lake that creates reflections. Probably nonsense, but worth documenting. June 16th, found evidence of additional camps. Someone is watching the watchers. Feel like I'm being followed. The handwriting was mine. The observations sounded like something I would write, but I had never written any of it. My hands were shaking as I flipped through more pages. The entries became increasingly paranoid, talking about seeing other versions of people, about the lake showing things that weren't there, about feeling like someone was stealing pieces of time. The final entry was dated today. June 20th, the real Dell Nightshade will arrive soon. Have to be ready, have to be perfect. The lake knows what it's doing. I dropped the notebook like it had caught fire. That's when I heard my own voice calling from across the lake. "Hello over there? Need some help?" I looked across the water and saw myself waving from the original shore. Same uniform, same build, same face. But there was something wrong with the way she moved, like someone trying to remember how walking worked. "I'm Ranger Nightshade," the other me called out. "You look lost." My throat felt like it was full of sand. I tried to call back, but only a croak came out. The other Dell started walking around the lake toward me. Her movements were getting more natural with each step, like she was practicing. As she got closer, I could see that she looked exactly like me, down to the smallest detail. Same scar on my chin from a childhood accident, same freckle pattern on my arms, same chip in my left front tooth. But her eyes were wrong. They were my eyes, but they held no recognition when they looked at me, like looking in a mirror that had forgotten who you were. "You shouldn't be here," the other Dell said when she was close enough to speak normally. "This is my investigation." "Who are you?" I managed to whisper. She tilted her head exactly the way I did when I was thinking. "I'm Dell Nightshade. The question is, who are you?" I looked down at my hands, at my uniform, at my reflection in the surface of the lake. For a terrifying moment, I couldn't remember. Was I the real one? Had I been camping here all week? Was this other person the intruder? "No," I said out loud, as much to convince myself as her. "No, I know who I am. I know where I've been." The other Dell smiled, and it was exactly my smile. "Do you? Check your pockets." With growing dread, I reached into my shirt pocket. There was a folded piece of paper there that hadn't been there an hour ago. I unfolded it with trembling fingers. It was a handwritten note in my own writing. "If you're reading this, you're not the real Dell. Go back to where you came from." "That's impossible," I breathed. "The lake shows truth," the other Dell said. "Look." I looked down at the water at our feet. Instead of seeing two reflections, I saw dozens. Dozens of Dell Nightshades, all slightly different, all staring back with varying expressions of confusion and fear. Some wore ranger uniforms, some wore civilian clothes. Some looked younger, some older. Some had scars I didn't remember getting. "Which one is real?" the other Dell asked. "Which one are you?" I stumbled backward, away from the water's edge. The other Dell didn't follow. She just stood there watching me with my own face. "I have to go," I said. "You can't leave," she replied. None of us can leave. We all belong to the lake now. I turned and ran, crashing through the underbrush, following what I hoped was the path back to the main trail. Behind me, I could hear my own voice calling, "You can't run from yourself, Del. You can't hide from what you are." I ran until my lungs burned, until my legs gave out, until I collapsed beside a massive poplar tree and sobbed like a lost child. When I finally looked up, I saw 3 sets of my own boot prints in the soft earth around me. I had been here before, multiple times, from multiple directions, but I had never been here at all. I must have sat there for an hour trying to make sense of what was happening to me. The rational part of my mind kept insisting that I was having some kind of breakdown, that the heat and stress had finally gotten to me. But the evidence was right there in the dirt. 3 sets of identical boot prints, all made by my boots, all leading to this exact spot. The sun was starting to set, painting the forest in shades of gold and shadow. I had to make a decision. Head back to my truck and radio for help, or return to Mirror Lake and confront whatever was happening there. The choice was made for me when I heard voices coming through the trees. "Told you she'd come back here," someone was saying. It sounded like Eugene Hartwell, but his voice was strange, hollow. "All of them always come back here," another voice replied. It was Bobby, but with that same empty quality. I crouched behind the tree and watched as the Hartwell family emerged from the shadows. But it wasn't the family I'd spoken to earlier. There were too many of them. 3 Eugenes walked in a line, identical in every way. Behind them came 5 Bobbies, all wearing the same clothes, all with the same weathered faces. And scattered among them were at least a dozen Jakes, all the same teenage boy, all moving with identical gestures. "The lake call pulls them back," one of the Eugenes said. "The lake needs them," replied another. They walked past my hiding spot without seeming to notice me, all heading toward Mirror Lake. I waited until they were out of sight, then followed at a distance. The scene at the lake was like something out of a nightmare. The shore was crowded with people, but there were only 4 faces among them: Eugene, Bobby, Jake, and mine. Dozens and dozens of copies, all standing in perfect silence, all staring at the black water. In the center of the lake, something was rising from the depths. It started as a ripple, then a bulge in the surface. The water parted like curtains, and what emerged wasn't quite human. It was tall and thin, constantly shifting, like looking at someone through water. Sometimes it looked like Eugene, sometimes like Bobby, sometimes like me. But always wrong, always slightly off, like a photograph that had been developed incorrectly. "The mockingbird," I whispered, remembering Cherokee stories I'd heard in fragments over the years. The spirit that steals reflections, that takes your image and makes it real while leaving you hollow. The thing in the lake turned toward my hiding spot, and when it looked at me, it wore my face. "Del," it said in my voice, "we've been waiting for you." All the copies on the shore turned to look at me. Dozens of my own face staring back, all with those empty, wrong eyes. "You can't fight what you are," the mockingbird said. "You can't resist your own nature." "I'm not you," I called back, stepping out from the trees. "I'm the real one." The thing laughed, and it was exactly my laugh. "Real? What makes you more real than them?" It gestured to the copies. "You all have the same memories, the same scars, the same fears. The lake makes perfect copies." "But not perfect enough," I said, and I reached up to touch the scar on my left shoulder, a jagged line from a childhood accident when I'd fallen through a barn roof. It was a scar that was always hidden under my uniform, a scar that no one else knew about. The mockingbird's expression flickered just for a moment. "You can copy what you see," I continued, "but you can't copy what's hidden. You can't copy the things that make us who we really are." I rolled up my sleeve, showing the scar. None of the copies had moved to do the same. "And you can't copy recent memories perfectly," I added, remembering how the fake Del had gotten details wrong about our conversation. "You're always a step behind, always trying to catch up." The mockingbird's form began to writhe and change. "It doesn't matter. Soon there will be so many copies that no one will remember which was first. The real will become the reflection, and the reflection will become real. Maybe, I said, and pulled out my flare gun. But reflections shatter when you break the mirror. The mockingbird realized what I was planning a second too late. I fired the flare directly into the center of Mirror Lake. The water exploded in a burst of red light and steam. The lake, which had been perfectly still for who knows how many years, suddenly erupted into chaos. Waves crashed against the shore as the thing in the depths let out a shriek that was every voice it had ever stolen. The copies began to flicker like bad television reception. Some simply faded away. Others collapsed into puddles of lake water. The mockingbird thrashed in the boiling lake, its form shifting rapidly between all the faces it had worn. "You can't destroy us!" it screamed in a voice that was mine and Eugene's and Bobby's all at once. "We are part of you now." "Maybe," I said, backing away from the shore as the water continued to churn. "But I'm still me." The lake suddenly went completely still. The silence was so absolute it hurt my ears. Then, slowly, the water began to drain away, disappearing into cracks that opened in the lake bed. Within minutes, Mirror Lake was gone, leaving only a circular depression filled with mud and the sea. Tattered bones of things that should have been left alone. The surviving copies, and there were still several, looked at me with expressions of confusion and loss. Without the lake to sustain them, they seemed lost, purposeless. "Go home," I told them quietly. "Find somewhere else to be." They wandered off into the forest, and I never saw them again. I made it back to my truck as the sun was setting. My radio crackled to life as soon as I got within range of the main road. "Ranger Nightshade, this is dispatch. Please respond." I keyed the mic with shaking hands. "This is Nightshade. I'm heading back to the station." "Copy that. How did the investigation go?" I looked back toward the forest, where the ancient poplar trees stood guard over secrets that were older than civilization. "The poaching situation has been resolved. The Hartwell family won't be a problem anymore." It was true, in its way. The real Hartwells had probably made it safely out of the forest. The copies were gone. Case closed. I filed my report the next morning, sticking to the facts that could be verified. Illegal camping, suspected poaching. Suspects fled the area when confronted. I mentioned the heat, the difficult terrain, the communication problems. I didn't mention the lake or the copies or the thing that lived in reflections. Who would have believed me? My supervisor praised me for running off a persistent group of poachers. I got a commendation for dedication to duty. Life went back to normal. Except it didn't. For months afterward, I couldn't look in mirrors without wondering if the reflection was really mine. I would catch glimpses of myself in store windows and feel a moment of panic, thinking I had seen myself walking down the street moments before. Other rangers started reporting strange encounters, meeting me in parts of the forest where I had never been, receiving radio calls from my voice when I was verifiably somewhere else. The Cherokee National Forest is a big place, full of old secrets and older spirits. Most of the time, we manage to coexist peacefully. Rangers do their job, the spirits do theirs, and everybody stays in their own lane. But sometimes, when I'm deep in the forest and far from any road, I still hear my own voice calling from just beyond the tree line. I hear myself asking questions I never asked, telling stories I never lived. And sometimes, when I'm feeling particularly brave or particularly foolish, I almost answer. The thing about reflections is that they're never quite perfect. There's always something reversed, something backward, something not quite right. But in the depths of a place like Mirror Lake, where the water is black and still and older than memory, sometimes the reflection becomes more real than the thing casting it. I learned that summer that there are things in these mountains that hunger for our shapes, our voices, our very selves. They want to wear our lives like clothes, to walk in our footsteps until no one remembers which footprints were made by the original. But I also learned that the things that make us truly ourselves, our hidden scars, our secret memories, our private fears and hopes, those things can't be copied. They can only be lived. My name is Delilah Nightshade, and I am the real one. I have to believe that. I have to keep believing it, no matter how many times I hear my own voice in the woods, no matter how many times I catch glimpses of myself in places I've never been. Because the moment I stop believing in my own reality is the moment I become just another reflection, just another copy wandering through the forest, looking for someone to replace. And somewhere in the Cherokee National Forest, in places where the maps don't quite match the terrain, there might still be copies of me walking patrol routes I never walked, filing reports I never wrote, living a life I never lived. But they're not the real Del Nightshade. I am. I have to be. My name is Jerry Wolfsbane, and I've been a forest ranger for 19 years. People always laugh at my last name when they find out what I do for a living. Wolfsbane the Ranger, they say. How perfect is that? If only they knew how wrong they were. I work in the George Washington National Forest in Virginia, up on Shenandoah Mountain. It's beautiful country, all rolling hills covered in oak and maple trees that turn bright red and gold in the fall. Most folks come here to camp or hike the trails. They see a peaceful forest where families can roast marshmallows and take pictures of deer. I see something different. I see a place where the balance got broken a long time ago. See, back when my grandfather was young, people killed off all the wolves in Virginia. Every last one. They thought they were doing the right thing, protecting their livestock and their children. But what they really did was mess up the whole system. Without wolves to hunt them, the deer got too many. They ate up all the young trees and bushes. The forest started dying. That's why I'm here. For the past 5 years, I've been part of a special program to bring wolves back to Virginia. We started with just a few pairs from up north. Good, healthy wolves that knew how to hunt and how to raise pups. The idea was to let nature fix itself. My job was to watch over them, make sure they stayed in their territory, keep track of how many deer they killed, write reports about how the forest was healing. It was good work, important work. I believed in it completely. I should mention that I grew up hunting with my dad. He taught me to respect predators, not fear them. A wolf kills to eat, he used to say. A man kills for a lot worse reasons. I never bought into those old stories about werewolves and monsters. That was just European fairy tale stuff. We had real wolves to worry about. My research station is pretty remote. It's basically a small cabin with a radio, some computers, and bunks for when other researchers visit. The nearest town is 50 miles away through winding mountain roads. Most of the time, I like the quiet. It helps me think and write better reports. But that September, something felt different. I'd been tracking our wolf packs all summer, and their behavior was changing. They were hunting in ways I'd never seen before, more organized, more deliberate. At first, I figured it was just because they were getting smarter about the territory. Wolves are quick learners, but as the harvest moon got brighter, I started noticing things that didn't make sense in any textbook I'd ever read. The morning it all started, I found claw marks on a tree near my cabin. Not unusual by itself. Bears mark trees all the time. But these marks were different. They were arranged in patterns, like symbols or letters I couldn't read, and they were too high up for any bear I knew about. I took pictures and measurements thinking I'd send them to the university. But when I developed the film that night, the patterns looked even stranger, almost like someone was trying to tell me something. That's when I heard the first howl. I'd heard our wolves howl plenty of times. Each pack has its own sound, like a family singing together. But this howl was different, deeper, longer, and it came from a direction where I knew no wolves were supposed to be. As I stood on my cabin porch, listening to that impossible sound echo through the trees, I felt something I hadn't felt since I was a little kid, lost in the woods. I felt like something was watching me. Something big and smart and patient. Something that had been waiting for me to notice it. The next morning, I found Jake Morrison's campsite. Jake was a poacher. I'd been trying to catch him for months. He'd set illegal traps all over the mountain, killing deer out of season and leaving the meat to rot. Just took the antlers for his trophy wall. The kind of hunter my dad would have called a waste of good air. But what I found at his camp wasn't Jake getting arrested. It was Jake getting torn apart. The state police said it was a bear attack, maybe a mother with cubs. But I'd seen bear attacks before, and this wasn't right. Bears are messy killers. They swipe and bite and leave claw marks everywhere. This was different. This was surgical. Something had grabbed Jake by the throat and killed him instantly. Then it had arranged his body in the center of his camp, arms spread wide like he was welcoming visitors. His illegal traps were piled up beside him in a neat stack, like someone was making a point about what happens to people who hurt the forest. The strangest part was the tracks around the camp. Wolf tracks, but bigger than any wolf I'd measured. And there were too many of them, all different sizes, like a whole pack had come to watch Jake die. But our wolves were tagged with radio collars, and none of my tracking equipment showed any pack activity in that area. I called it into headquarters and spent the day helping the police take pictures and measurements. The whole time I kept looking over my shoulder, feeling watched again. When evening came and the police left, I should have gone back to my cabin. Instead, I decided to follow the tracks. Big mistake. The trail led up into the thickest part of the forest, where the trees grew so close together that even afternoon sunlight barely reached the ground. The tracks stayed clear in the soft dirt, but they started changing as I followed them, getting more human-like. Like whatever made them was walking on 2 legs instead of 4. After about a mile, the tracks stopped at a clearing I'd never seen before. In the middle was a circle of stones, each one about the size of a person. They were arranged in perfect order like an ancient calendar. But these stones weren't old. Someone had put them here recently. Someone with very strong arms. It's when I heard voices, not human voices, wolf voices. But they were having a conversation. One would howl a pattern, then another would answer. Back and forth like they were discussing something important. And the sounds were coming from all around the clearing, like I was surrounded. I drew my service pistol and tried to count how many different voices I could hear. At least 6, maybe more. They were coordinating, taking turns, waiting for responses. It was the most organized pack behavior I'd ever witnessed. Then the conversation stopped. The forest went completely silent. No birds, no insects, no wind in the trees. Just me, standing in that circle of stones with my heart pounding so loud I was sure everything in the forest could hear it. Something moved in the trees to my left. Something big enough to shake branches 20 feet off the ground. I swung my flashlight toward the sound, but all I saw were shadows and leaves. Another sound from my right. Then behind me. They were circling the clearing, staying just out of sight, testing me, seeing how I'd react. I backed toward the center of the stone circle, gun raised, trying to watch all directions at once. That's when I saw the eyes. Yellow-green and bright as headlights, staring at me from the dark spaces between trees. Not the small, quick eyes of normal wolves. These were bigger, higher off the ground, and completely focused on me. One pair of eyes moved closer, then another. They were coming into the clearing, but staying in the shadows where my flashlight couldn't reach them. I could hear breathing, heavy and controlled, patient. The biggest pair of eyes, the ones directly in front of me, started moving side to side, like whatever they belonged to was studying me from different angles. Then a voice came from that direction. Not a howl this time. Something that sounded almost like words, but in no language I'd said, ever heard. Other voices answered from around the circle. They were talking about me. I was sure of it, discussing what to do with the human who'd found their secret meeting place. I started backing out of the clearing, gun still raised, moving as slowly and quietly as I could. The eyes followed my movement, but didn't come any closer. They were letting me leave, for now. When I finally reached the tree line, I heard one more sound, a low rumble that might have been laughter, or maybe a warning. I ran all the way back to my cabin and didn't stop until I was inside with the door locked and my radio turned up loud for company. But as I sat there trying to write my report, I kept thinking about those eyes, how intelligent they looked, how they'd watched me like they knew exactly who I was, and how they'd let me go like they had plans for me. The attack started 3 days later. First it was Tom Bradley, a game warden from the next county over. He'd come to help me investigate Jake's death. We were supposed to meet at the old logging road, but Tom never showed up. I found his truck parked at the trailhead with the engine still running and the door wide open. His radio was on the ground nearby, crushed like someone had stepped on it. The search and rescue team found Tom 2 miles into the forest. He was alive, but barely. Something had bitten him on the arm and left him tied to a tree with his own rope. Not tied up to hurt him, tied up to keep him there, like he was a message. When Tom woke up in the hospital, he couldn't remember what had attacked him. But he kept talking about dreams. Dreams where he was running through the forest on 4 legs, hunting with a pack. The doctors said it was trauma from blood loss. I wasn't so sure. The second attack happened to Dr. Sarah Chen, a wildlife biologist who'd driven up from the university to collect samples. I found her camping gear scattered around her research site like a tornado had hit it. But Sarah herself was sitting calmly in the middle of the mess, staring up at the full moon with a strange smile on her face. "They spoke to me," she kept saying. "They told me wonderful things about the forest, about how it's supposed to work, about the old ways." Sarah quit her job the next week and moved to a cabin somewhere up in the mountains. Her colleagues said she'd had a nervous breakdown, but I saw her one more time, about a month later, running through the trees at night. She moved like she'd been born in the forest. And she wasn't running alone. The third person was Billy Hutchins, a local hunter who'd been bragging around town about bagging the biggest wolf in Virginia. I tried to warn him off, told him our wolves were protected. But Billy was the type who didn't listen to government rangers. He set up his hunting blind in the exact spot where I'd found that circle of stones. I guess he figured that if wolves had been there once, they'd come back. They did come back, but not the way Billy expected. I found Billy's rifle broken in half and hanging from a tree branch. Billy himself was sitting underneath it, perfectly unharmed but completely changed. He talked differently, moved differently, and he kept referring to his family up in the mountains. "You should come meet them," Billy told me. "They're very interested in you, Jerry. They've been watching you work all these years. They like what you've been trying to do for the forest." That's when I started understanding what was really happening. These weren't just wolf attacks. They were recruitments. Something was building a pack, and it wasn't satisfied with just wolves. It wanted humans, too. Smart humans who understood the forest, who could help it accomplish whatever it was planning, and I was next on the list. I started carrying more than just my service pistol. I brought a shotgun loaded with silver shot. My grandmother had been Irish, and she'd told me stories about werewolves when I was little. I'd never believed them before, but I was starting to think maybe I should have listened more carefully. The silver worked, sort of. When I was carrying it, the pack kept their distance, but they were always there, just out of sight, watching, following, making sure I knew they hadn't forgotten about me. My radio started picking up strange sounds at night. Not wolf howls, but something like voices speaking in a language that hurt my head to listen to. The voices would go on for hours, like they were having meetings or giving instructions. Sometimes I thought I could almost understand what they were saying. Then my equipment started being moved around. I'd set up cameras to monitor the wolf territories, but every morning the cameras would be in different places, not broken or stolen, just moved, like someone was trying to show me something specific. When I developed the film, I found pictures of things that shouldn't exist, shapes that looked like wolves but stood up like people, faces that were almost human but had too many teeth. And in every picture there was one figure that was bigger than the others, a female shape with silver-gray fur and eyes that seemed to look right through the camera lens at me. She appeared to be giving orders to the others, organizing them for something important. The pack mother. That's what I started calling her in my head. The alpha female who was building an army. On October 15th, exactly 1 month after Jake Morrison's death, I found a note pinned to my cabin door. It wasn't written in any human language, but somehow I could read it anyway. Time to choose. Join willingly or be taken. Tomorrow night when the moon is full. I had less than 24 hours to figure out how to fight something that had already beaten everyone else who'd tried. The pack mother came for me during the darkest part of the night, just before dawn, when the full moon was setting behind the mountains. I was ready for her. At least I thought I was. I'd spent all day preparing my cabin like a fortress. Silver crosses on every window and door. Shotgun shells, filled with silver shot, lined up on my table. My grandfather's old silver hunting knife in my belt. If werewolves were real, then the old ways of fighting them had to work too. But when she finally appeared, standing in the clearing in front of my cabin, I realized how foolish I'd been. She was beautiful and terrible at the same time. 8 feet tall when she stood up on her back legs, covered in thick silver-gray fur that seemed to glow in the moonlight. Her face was a mix of wolf and human, with intelligence burning in those yellow-green eyes I'd seen before. She moved with perfect grace, like she owned every inch of the forest. And she wasn't alone. The entire pack was with her. Tom Bradley and Sarah Chen and Billy Hutchins, all changed into something between human and wolf. They surrounded my cabin but didn't try to break in. They just waited while the pack mother stepped closer to my door. When she spoke, her voice was like nothing I'd ever heard. It came from her throat, but also from inside my head, in words I understood, even though she wasn't speaking English. Jerry Wolfsbane, you have served the forest well. You brought back the wolves when others wanted to keep them gone. You understand the balance that must be maintained. Now you can serve even better. I raised my shotgun toward the window. Stay back. I know what you are. She laughed, and the sound was like wind through pine trees. You know nothing. You think we are monsters from your human stories. But we are older than your stories. We are what the forest needs to survive. You're killing people. We are saving them. Look at your friends. Tom no longer lies awake worrying about criminals and budgets. Sarah no longer struggles to make others understand what the forest is telling her. Billy no longer destroys what he should protect. They are free. They are whole. They are family. I could see the three of them standing among the other wolves, and she was right. They looked happy, more alive than they'd ever seemed when they were fully human. But they also looked hungry, and they were all staring at me like I was their next meal. The old wolves you brought back are strong, the pack mother continued, but they are not strong enough. Humans have machines and guns and laws that keep pushing the forest smaller. We need pack members who understand both worlds, who can protect our territory from inside your human systems. So you're building an army. I am building a family that includes you, Jerry Wolfsbane. You were chosen long ago from the first day you set foot in our territory. Every report you wrote, every wolf you helped, every hunter you turned away, you were already serving us. Now it is time to join us completely. She stepped closer to my cabin, and I could see that the silver crosses weren't stopping her at all. They weren't even slowing her down. The old protections do not work on us, she said, reading my thoughts. We are not the cursed creatures from your human myths. We are the forest's answer to what humans have done to the world. We are evolution. I fired my shotgun through the window. The silver shot hit her in the chest and she staggered backward. But instead of falling down or dissolving like monsters did in movies, she just looked annoyed. The wounds were already healing, silver shot falling out of her fur like raindrops. Silver disrupts our pack communication, she admitted. It makes it harder for us to coordinate, but it cannot kill us, and it cannot stop what must happen. The other pack members started moving closer to my cabin. I could hear them on the roof, scratching at the walls, testing the windows. They were going to come in whether I wanted them to or not. I won't become a monster, I said. You will become what you were always meant to be. A guardian of the balance, a keeper of the old ways, someone who understands that sometimes the forest must fight back. She was right outside my door now. Choose, Jerry Wolfsbane. Join willingly and keep your human mind alongside your new abilities. Fight us and be taken anyway, but lose yourself in the process. I thought about Jake Morrison, torn apart for hurting the forest. I thought about all the other hunters and developers and politicians who wanted to cut down more trees and build more roads. I thought about how the wolves I'd helped bring back were healthier and smarter than any wolves in the textbooks. Maybe the pack mother was right. Maybe this was evolution. I put down my shotgun and opened the door. She smiled, showing teeth that were definitely not human. "Welcome to the family, Jerry." Then she bit me on the neck, and everything changed forever. The transformation took 3 days. I remember lying in my cabin while fever burned through my body and my bones stretched and changed. The pack mother stayed with me the whole time, bringing me water and telling me stories about the forest from before humans ever walked in Virginia. About the time when wolves and bears and mountain lions kept everything in perfect balance. When the fever broke, I could hear every heartbeat in the forest. I could smell fear from miles away and track a mouse through grass from yesterday. My eyes could see in complete darkness, and my muscles felt like they could tear apart trees. But I was still me. Still Jerry Wolfsbane, Forest Ranger. I could think and plan and remember everything about my human life. The pack mother had kept her promise. "Now you understand," she said on the morning I was fully changed. "You can protect the forest from both sides. Keep your job, write your reports, turn away the hunters who would upset the balance. But when someone threatens our territory, you can do more than just write citations." I went back to work the following Monday. My supervisor noticed that I seemed healthier and more energetic than usual, and my reports became even more detailed and accurate. The wolf population continued to grow under my careful management, but I had other responsibilities now. When developers tried to build a shopping mall on the edge of wolf territory, I found their survey equipment destroyed by vandals and their permits mysteriously lost in bureaucratic delays. When poachers set illegal traps, they discovered that some predator had been watching them and knew exactly where all their hiding spots were. The forest began to heal faster than anyone expected. The wolf packs grew stronger and more organized. Deer populations balanced out perfectly. Even the trees seemed healthier, growing taller and thicker than they had in decades. Other rangers started requesting transfers to different forests, saying our territory made them nervous. They couldn't explain why, but something about the woods felt different now, more alive, more aware. They were right to be nervous. On full moon nights, I run with my family through the mountains. We patrol our territory and make sure the balance is maintained. We are the forest's immune system, and we take our job very seriously. Sometimes when we find someone who truly understands what the forest needs, someone who has been trying to protect it like I used to do, the pack mother considers adding them to our family. It's always their choice, of course. We don't force anyone who isn't ready. But most people aren't ready. Most people are too afraid of changing, too attached to their human weaknesses. They can't see that becoming part of something bigger is not a curse, but a gift. I've been with the pack for 5 years now. My official reports show that our wolf reintroduction program has been the most successful in the country. Wildlife populations are thriving. Human encroachment has stopped completely. The forest is winning. Sometimes hikers go missing in our territory. The official reports blame bear attacks or people getting lost in the wilderness. But hikers who respect the forest, who follow the rules and don't leave trash or hurt animals, they always make it out safely. We watch over them like guardian angels. It's the others who have problems, the ones who come here thinking they can take whatever they want from the forest. The ones who see our territory as something to be conquered instead of something to be protected. They learn differently. The pack mother says there are others like us in different forests around the world. Old places where the balance got broken and nature had to find new ways to defend itself. We're not alone, and we're not going anywhere. Every month, when the moon is full, I feel the call getting stronger. The human part of me gets smaller, and the wolf part grows larger. Someday, probably soon, I'll give up my ranger job completely and join my family in the deep forest permanently. But for now, I'm still useful in both worlds. Still Jerry Wolfsbane, protector of the balance. And if you ever find yourself hiking in the George Washington National Forest, remember to respect what you find there. Follow the marked trails. Don't hunt without permission. Don't leave anything behind that doesn't belong, because we're always watching. And we remember everyone who enters our territory. The forest has guardians now. We are pack. We are family. And we will never let the balance be broken again. My name is Cassandra Stoneheart, but everyone calls me Cass. I've been a ranger here in Pisgah National Forest for 14 years now, and I thought I'd seen everything these mountains could throw at me. Boy, was I wrong. People come from all over to see Linville Gorge. They call it the Grand Canyon of North Carolina. And when you're standing on the rim looking down into that 2,000-foot drop, you understand why. The walls are made of ancient quartzite that's been here longer than humans have walked the earth. It's beautiful, but it's also deadly if you don't respect it. I specialize in technical rescue operations. When someone gets stuck on a cliff face or falls down a crevice, they call me. I've pulled more people out of that gorge than I care to count. Some alive, some not. It's part of the job, though it never gets easier. The Cherokee used to live around here, and they had stories about the gorge. Old tales about a guardian that watched over the stone bridges. I never paid much attention to those stories. I figured they were just trying to keep people from doing stupid things on the cliffs. If only I'd listened. It was December of 1991 when everything changed. We'd had a bad ice storm the week before, and the whole gorge was like a skating rink. The quartzite cliffs were covered in a thin sheet of ice that made climbing almost impossible. Any smart person would stay away until it melted, but climbers aren't always smart people. I learned that the hard way when I was younger. I used to climb myself, back before I became a ranger. Had a partner named Jake who was fearless, maybe too fearless. We were climbing a route called Devil's Backbone when a hold broke away under his hands. I watched him fall 300 feet onto the rocks below. That was 12 years ago, but I still wake up sometimes hearing the sound his body made when it hit. After that, I hung up my climbing shoes and dedicated my life to keeping other people from making the same mistakes. The mountains don't care if you're experienced or not. They'll kill you just the same if you're careless. That Tuesday morning started like any other. I was in the ranger station drinking my second cup of coffee when the radio crackled to life. Cass, we got a situation at Table Rock. Group of climbers stuck on the north face. I grabbed my gear and headed out. The north face of Table Rock is technical climbing, not something you attempt unless you know what you're doing. But as I hiked the 3 miles to the base of the cliff, something felt wrong. The forest was too quiet. No bird sounds, no squirrels chattering. Even the wind seemed to be holding its breath. When I reached the base of Table Rock, I looked up and saw them. 3 climbers, maybe 200 feet up the face, huddled together on what looked like a narrow ledge. But that's when things got weird. I'd climbed this route before, and I knew every ledge, every crack, every handhold. The ledge they were on shouldn't exist. I pulled out my binoculars and studied the rock face. The climbers were definitely there, and they were definitely scared. One of them was waving frantically when he saw me. But the more I stared at that ledge, the more confused I became. According to every map and guidebook, that section of the cliff was smooth quartzite with no ledge for at least 50 feet in either direction. "Hey, up there!" I shouted through my megaphone. "How did you get on that ledge?" The response came back faint but clear. "We don't know. We were following the route and suddenly we were here. The rope won't reach anywhere." I studied the cliff through my binoculars again. Their rope was hanging free, not touching any rock. It was like they had teleported onto that ledge, but people don't teleport. There had to be an explanation. I radioed for a helicopter rescue. With that ice on the cliffs, trying to climb up to them would be suicide. Better to bring them down from above. But while I waited, I decided to take a closer look at the cliff face. That's when I found the first body. It was wedged in a crack about 30 feet up, a young woman in climbing gear. She couldn't have been dead long. Her body was still warm despite the freezing air. But what made my blood run cold was the look of terror frozen on her face. Her mouth was open in a scream and her eyes were wide with absolute horror. More disturbing was her position. She was jammed headfirst into a crack that was barely wide enough for her shoulders. No falling climber would end up in that position naturally. It was like something had stuffed her there deliberately. The helicopter arrived 20 minutes later. As it approached the stranded climbers, the pilot's voice came over the radio, confused and shaken. "Cass, I don't see any ledge. Where exactly are these people?" I looked up through my binoculars. The climbers were still there, still waving. But the pilot was right. From his angle, there was no ledge visible. It was as if the rock formation only existed when viewed from ground level. "They're right there," I radioed back. 200 feet up the north face. "Negative, Cass. I'm looking right at smooth rock. There's nowhere for anyone to be standing." The helicopter circled the cliff face 3 times before the pilot reluctantly headed back to base. "I can't rescue people I can't see," he said. As soon as the helicopter disappeared, I looked back up at the cliff. The climbers were gone. I spent the next hour calling their names, scanning every inch of the rock face with my binoculars. Nothing. It was like they had never been there at all. But I had seen them. I had talked to them. They were real. That night I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about that woman's body wedged in the crack and those 3 climbers who had vanished into thin air. I'd been doing mountain rescue for 14 years, and I'd never encountered anything I couldn't explain. Every accident had a logical cause. Equipment failure, human error, bad weather. There was always a reason. The next morning I went back to Table Rock. I wanted to recover the woman's body and try to figure out what had happened. But when I got there, the crack was empty. No body, no climbing gear, no blood. Nothing but smooth quartzite, like she had never existed either. I was starting to question my own sanity when I found the second set of impossible evidence. Carved into the rock face, about 10 feet up, were symbols I'd never seen before. They weren't Cherokee. I'd studied enough local history to recognize their writing. These symbols looked older, more primitive. They seemed to show stick figures crossing a bridge with a large figure beneath them. As I studied the symbols, I heard something that made my skin crawl. Footsteps. Heavy, scraping footsteps like someone dragging their feet across stone. But there was no one else in the gorge. I was alone. The footsteps circled around me, always staying just out of sight behind rocks or trees. When I turned to look, there was never anything there. But I could feel eyes watching me, studying me like I was prey. That's when I noticed something that shouldn't have been possible. Spanning the gorge about a quarter-mile south of Table Rock was a stone bridge, a natural arch of quartzite that connected one rim to the other. I'd hiked this area hundreds of times, and there had never been a bridge there before. I radioed back to the station. "Hey Mike, is there a natural stone bridge in Section 12 of the gorge?" "What bridge?" came the reply. "Cass, you know there's no way to cross the gorge except at the trail bridge near the visitor center." But I was looking right at it. A perfect arch of stone, maybe 6 feet wide and 50 feet long, suspended 200 feet above the gorge floor. And walking across it, silhouetted against the gray sky, was a figure. A very large figure. I grabbed my binoculars and focused on the bridge. The figure was massive. At least 8 feet tall and built like a small building. It moved slowly but purposefully, each step causing small rocks to fall into the gorge below. As I watched, it stopped in the middle of the bridge and turned to look directly at me. Even from a quarter-mile away, I could see its eyes. They glowed with a dull red light, like coals in a dying fire. We stared at each other for what felt like hours but was probably only seconds. Then it raised one enormous arm and pointed at me. The bridge vanished. Not collapsed, not destroyed, just gone, like it had never existed. The creature fell with it, tumbling into the depths of the gorge. But instead of the crash I expected to hear, there was only silence. I ran to the spot where the bridge had been, my heart pounding. The rim showed no signs that a stone arch had ever connected the 2 sides, but down in the gorge I could see movement. Something large and dark was climbing up the cliff face toward me. I've never been so scared in my life. This wasn't human, and it wasn't natural. It was something else entirely, something that could create and destroy stone bridges at will. I did the only sensible thing I could think of. I ran. But running in the mountains is tricky, especially when you're panicked. I took a wrong turn and found myself on a trail I didn't recognize. That should have been impossible. I'd hiked every trail in this section of the forest. I could navigate these mountains blindfolded. But this trail was new, cut through areas where no trail had ever existed. The trail led me deeper into the gorge, down paths that switched back and forth along the cliff face. As I descended, I began to hear voices, other people calling for help. At first, I thought it was an echo, but the voices were coming from all directions. "Help us! We're trapped! The bridge is gone!" I followed the voices and found them. Dozens of climbers, hikers, and tourists, all standing on impossible ledges and outcroppings that jutted from the cliff face. They were spread out across the gorge like ornaments on a Christmas tree, each group isolated on their own tiny platform of stone. "How did you get there?" I called to the nearest group, a family of 4 about 50 feet below me. "We were hiking the Tanawa Trail," the father called back. "We stopped to take pictures of the gorge, and suddenly the ground just opened up. When we looked around, we were here." The Tanawa Trail ran along the rim of the gorge, a safe and easy walk for families. There was no way they could have ended up on a cliff ledge unless something had put them there. "Stay calm," I shouted. "I'm going to get help." But as I turned to climb back up the trail, I found my way blocked. The creature was there, standing in the middle of the path. Up close, it was even more terrifying than I had imagined. It was made of stone, living stone that shifted and flowed like flesh. Its body was roughly human-shaped, but built on a massive scale. Its arms were as thick as tree trunks, and its hands ended in fingers like stone spears. Its face was the worst part, ancient and cruel, with those burning red eyes and a mouth full of teeth like broken stalactites. When it spoke, its voice sounded like grinding millstones. "You see them," it said, gesturing toward the trapped people. "You see my collection." "Let them go," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "They're innocent people." The creature laughed, a sound like an avalanche. "Innocent? They came to my gorge. They walked on my stone. They belong to me now. This isn't your gorge. It belongs to everyone. I was here when the Cherokee walked these mountains. I was here when the ice carved these cliffs. I am the stone, and the stone is me. These little meat things come to admire my work, so I give them a closer look. Forever." As it spoke, I began to understand what I was dealing with. This wasn't just some monster. It was the gorge itself, given form and consciousness. The stone bridges, the impossible ledges, the shifting trails. It was all part of the creature's body, shaped and reshaped at will. "The Cherokee called me the bridge keeper," it continued. "They brought me offerings and asked permission before crossing my domain. But you modern humans, you take without asking. You climb without respect. You think my stone exists for your pleasure. So you kill them? I give them what they came for, a permanent view of my beauty. They wanted to see the gorge forever, so I make it so. What could be more generous?" The creature stepped closer, and I could feel the heat radiating from its stone skin. "But you're different," it said. "You save the little meat things. You understand my dangers. You could serve me well." "Never." "Then you'll join my collection. I'll find you a nice ledge, high up where you can watch over all the others. You'll like it? Eventually." The creature reached for me with one massive stone hand. But I was ready. I'd been carrying climbing explosives, small charges used to clear unstable rock faces. If this thing was made of living stone, maybe it could be hurt like stone. I pulled the pin on a small charge and threw it at the creature's feet. The explosion was smaller than I'd hoped, but it had an effect. The creature roared in pain and stumbled backward, clutching its foot where chips of stone had been blown away. "You can be hurt," I said, pulling out another charge. "Clever little meat thing," the creature snarled. "But you can't hurt me enough to matter. I am the entire gorge. Blow up my foot and I'll grow another. But you're just soft flesh and brittle bone." It was right, of course. I only had 3 more charges, and it would take a lot more than that to seriously damage something the size of a mountain. But maybe I didn't need to destroy it. Maybe I just needed to distract it. "You said the Cherokee brought you offerings," I called out as I backed down the trail. "What kind of offerings?" "Respect, fear, recognition of my power. They knew I was here. They acknowledged me. What if I could bring you more worshippers? People who would come to the gorge specifically to honor you?" The creature paused, considering this. You would do that? If you let the trapped people go, all of them. And what would I get in return? I thought fast. A different kind of collection. Instead of keeping people trapped forever, you could let them go back and tell others about you. Word would spread. People would come from all over to see the bridge keeper. You'd be famous. The creature's eyes burned brighter as it considered this. Famous, it repeated, tasting the word. Yes, I remember when humans told stories about me around their fires. I miss that. So we have a deal? Perhaps. But first, you must prove your faith. You must trust me completely. The creature gestured, and a stone bridge began to form across the gorge. But this one was different from the others I'd seen. It was narrow, maybe 2 feet wide, and it swayed slightly as if it were alive. Cross my bridge, the creature commanded. Show me you believe in my power. I looked at the bridge, then at the 200-foot drop below it. The stone looked solid enough, but I'd already seen how this creature could make bridges disappear at will. If I stepped onto it, I'd be completely at its mercy. If I cross, you'll free the others. If you cross, I'll know you're serious about our bargain. I had no choice. The trapped people were running out of time. Some of the ledges looked barely big enough to stand on, and the December cold was brutal. They wouldn't survive another night. I stepped onto the bridge. The stone felt solid under my feet, but I could feel it pulsing like a heartbeat. Each step was terrifying, knowing that the creature could drop me into the abyss with a thought. Halfway across, the bridge began to sway more violently, and I had to get down on my hands and knees to keep from falling. Faster, little meat thing, the creature called. My patience grows thin. I crawled the rest of the way across, not daring to look down into the gorge below. When I finally reached the other side, I was shaking so hard I could barely stand. Good, the creature said. You have courage. Now for the real test. The bridge vanished behind me, trapping me on the far rim with the creature. You lied, I said. I never lie. I said I would know you were serious if you crossed, and now I know. You're serious enough to die for these people. That makes you valuable to me in a different way. The creature began to change, its stone body flowing and reshaping itself. Its arms stretched out and hardened, becoming part of the cliff face. Its legs sank into the ground, merging with the bedrock. Within moments, it had transformed itself into a living extension of the gorge wall. I am tired of standing, it said, its voice now coming from the rocks themselves. I will rest here for a while, and you will be my eyes and ears. You will tell people about me, bring them to worship me, and in return, I will let you live on my body forever. I realized with horror that the creature intended to turn me into part of the gorge, just like the others. But instead of trapping me on a ledge, it wanted to make me its agent, a living lure to bring more victims. That's when I pulled out my last 3 explosive charges. I don't think so, I said, and threw all 3 directly at what had been the creature's head. The explosion was tremendous. The creature's scream shook the entire gorge, sending rock slides tumbling down the cliff faces. Its body writhed and convulsed, stone flesh rippling like water. In its agony, it lost control of the false formations it had created. All across the gorge, the impossible ledges began to crumble, but instead of falling, the trapped people found themselves on solid ground. The creature's pain had forced it to return them to safety. They appeared scattered across the rim of the gorge, confused and frightened, but alive. The creature itself was badly hurt but not destroyed. As it writhed in pain, I saw my chance. I rappelled down its thrashing body, using my climbing gear to descend as fast as possible. Stone fingers the size of tree trunks grabbed for me, but the creature was too disoriented to catch me. I hit the bottom of the gorge hard, landing wrong and feeling something snap in my lower back, but I was alive. And I was free. Above me, the creature was slowly reforming, pulling its scattered stone body back together, but it would be a while before it was strong enough to create new traps. The rescue took 2 days. Helicopters airlifted out the trapped people, and a medical team carried me out on a stretcher. My back was broken in 2 places, Not completely severed, but damaged enough that I'd never be the same. The doctor said I was lucky to walk again. The official report blamed everything on a rock slide caused by the ice storm. Geological instability, they said. Optical illusions caused by stress and altitude. The witnesses were traumatized and their memories couldn't be trusted. Just another mountain accident with an unusually high number of survivors. But I know what really happened. And sometimes, when the wind is just right, I can still hear that grinding voice echoing from the depths of the gorge. The bridgekeeper isn't gone. It's just resting, healing, waiting for the right moment to start its collection again. I retired from the ranger service 6 months later, my back never fully healed, and I developed a fear of heights that made rescue work impossible. But sometimes I'd drive out to the overlook and watch the gorge looking for signs of new bridges or impossible ledges. Last month, 3 climbers went missing, and Table Rock. Their bodies were never found. The official explanation was equipment failure, but I know better. The bridgekeeper is awake again, and it's hungry. I've tried to warn people. But who would believe a story like this? So instead, I do what I can. I volunteer at the visitor center, telling people about the dangers of the gorge. I emphasize safety procedures and the importance of staying on marked trails. I can't tell them about the creature that lives in the stone, but I can try to keep them from attracting its attention. Because the Cherokee were right about one thing. There is a guardian watching over the stone bridges of Linville Gorge. It's ancient, it's patient, and it's always collecting. The only difference between now and then is that we've forgotten how to show it proper respect. And in a place like this, forgetting the old rules can get you killed. Every night I wake up in a cold sweat, feeling phantom stone beneath my feet, and hearing that grinding voice in my dreams. Some experiences change you forever, mark you in ways that never heal. The bridgekeeper left its mark on me, and I suspect it always will. But at least I'm still here to tell the story. That's more than I can say for the others who've encountered it over the years. Sometimes, when you're dealing with forces older than human civilization, survival is the best victory you can hope for. The gorge is still beautiful, still draws thousands of visitors every year. But now, when I look at those ancient quartzite cliffs, I don't just see stone. I see something alive, something watching, something waiting for the next person foolish enough to ignore the warnings and venture too far from the safety of marked paths. The bridgekeeper is still out there, patient as stone, hungry as the grave. And sooner or later, it will claim its next victim. Just make sure it isn't you.